Right. Well, first of all, let me thank you all for joining online for the Bob Davids Chapter's annual meeting. We have 173 registered for the meeting. Last year, we topped out in the low 100s for our virtual meeting. We all thought last year's lineup was strong, but this year's group is not to be missed, not to be denied. Baseball Prospectus, MLB official historian John Thorn, Retrosheet czar David Smith, the Washington Nationals first closer Chad Cordero, and today's cleanup hitter, Senator slugging great Frank Howard. I'm Mark Pattison, Secretary of the Bob Davids Chapter and your MC for this gathering. We'll get started in just a minute, but first things first. Part of doing our deep dives into baseball history now includes doing deep dives into SABR's own history. And in the past year, our chapter alone lost two of the greats. Dave Paulson, who was chapter treasurer longer than I've been a member, and I've joined in 2000. And also the founder of our monthly Talking Baseball Book Club, which is still working on a streak longer than Cal Ripken's. Dave was going to write a review for the Squibber, our quarterly newsletter about the play Tony Stone at Nationals Park. We cut the deal on a Monday, and he passed away that Thursday. We also lost Mark Pankin, the founding webmaster of Retrosheet, which makes his contributions to our understanding of the game and tens of thousands of games to boot invaluable. We're going to take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of these two giants. And if there are other SABR members from our chapter you know of who passed away in 2021, please put their names in the chat box. And now for that moment of silence. Thank you. Now for the business meeting, I take you back to Peter Cottrell, our chapter president. Pete.
Mark, thanks. Good morning to all of our guests today and happy SABR Day. And since this is a SABR Day, SABR event, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the many new, exciting and innovative offerings from SABR. And these include the following. SABR Analytics Certification Program is an online, on-demand curriculum offering professional development and learning opportunities for both interested fans and aspiring professionals in elevating their skills and knowledge relating to baseball analytics. The first course, Conversational Analytics and Critical Thinking in Baseball, is now available online. Also, the new virtual event, Ballpark Figures, a monthly interview series hosted by award-winning writer Shakia Taylor, debuts on Thursday, February 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Shakia was a recipient of the 2021 SABR Analytics Conference Research Award for historical baseball analysis and commentary, and the interviews on the first Thursday of each month starting in March will be free and open to any active SABR member. The newly formed SABR Landmarks Research Committee endeavors to curate the most comprehensive list of baseball-related historical sites and attractions across the world. Interested SABR members can learn more and join in the effort by becoming a member of the committee. Next is the early registration is now open for the SABR Virtual Analytics Conference, which will be held over 4 days in online sessions from March 17th through the 20th, this coming March. The Virtual Analytics Conference schedule consists of research presentations and guest speakers from throughout the baseball analytics community, career development sessions led by experienced sports professionals, and industry networking opportunities. Visit sabr.org/analytics to learn more. Focusing on our local Bob Davids chapter, keep an eye out for an announcement about the annual chapter elections. Our next chapter event will be February the February installment of our monthly Talking Baseball book presentation. We usually meet on the first Saturday of the month at 9 a.m. But since so many other SABR chapters are having their SABR Day meetings on February 5th, our next meeting will be on Saturday, February 12th at 9 a.m. And our guest will be Ralph Carhart, who will discuss his book, The Hall Ball, One Fan's Journey to Unite Cooperstown Immortals with a Single Baseball. Please consider becoming a member of the Bob Davis chapter so you can get your meeting details sent directly to you. Otherwise, you're able to find the meeting details on the SABR events calendar. And with that, I turn it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Peter. And we've got about 8 minutes before our first presentation, but Peter can look in the meeting roster to see if our speakers are present. If not, I was going to remark about anybody who's living up and down the East Coast may have seen a dusting or more of snow today. Kind of reminds me of opening day in Detroit. So and we did have one mention of another chapter member who passed on. Larry Slagle passed away on the 10th of January this year. Thanks to Steve Daniels for letting us know. I see Scott Fishtal has his hand raised. Scott, if you can unmute yourself, speak your piece, followed by Mark DeLuca.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to point out the link I put in the chat. The call for presentations for SABR 50 in Baltimore is out. So if anyone would like to submit an abstract, the link is there for you to go in and do that. Love to get as many as possible this year. So, and hopefully we will really be in person this year. So that's the plan, and let's keep our fingers crossed that we get there. Thanks, all I had.
Scott, before you mute yourself, what are the dates for SABR 50?
August, let's see, I think it's the 17th through the 21st. I remember
in Baltimore, the city
in Baltimore. Right, it's at the Grand Hyatt.
Thank you.
So it should be,
thank you,
Scott.
Scott.
A good event. Thanks.
Mark, you raise your hand, unmute yourself and speak your piece, please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Mark DeLuca. I'm brand new to SABR. I'm taking a course through Sports Management Worldwide with Dan Evans, and he turned me on to this. So I registered a couple of weeks ago and member of the Baltimore chapter, and they're not having a meeting, so they encouraged us to join your meeting today. So I'm hoping to learn a lot from you guys. Quick question. I did enroll in the conversational analytics and critical thinking in baseball, gone through the first few modules. It's really well done. I'm enjoying it. I'm just wondering, how often can we expect to have future modules available? Do we know yet?
I don't know that there's anyone on this call that can answer that. That's more from the central office. Actually, I think Bill Nowlin might be on the call. He's a board member, but whether he knows the details or not, I expect that there's, I think there's at least 2 or 3 other modules in the works, and I'm not sure what the release dates are on those. But certainly, if you pay attention to This Week in SABR monthly mailing or the SABR website, I'm sure you'll have all the details you want as they come out.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, and we do have confirmation from both our presenters that they are here, so let us not waste any more time. For our first presentation, leading off our meeting, a study of Washington Nationals analytics from the dynamic duo of baseball prospectus, Sidney Bergman and Jarrett Seidler. Sidney Bergman is an educator and a writer living in the Washington area. In her spare time, she collects data about player ejections and thinks vastly too much about Tyler Clippert's pitch arsenal. Her work has been featured not only in Baseball Prospectus, but the Hardball Times, Fangraphs, and other baseball writing venues. She also writes fiction, primarily high-heat romances, under a baseball-inspired pen name. Her debut novel, Unwritten Rules, is available through Carina Press, a Harlequin imprint, with other books forthcoming. Jarrett Seidler is the Senior Prospect Writer and Evaluation Coordinator for Baseball Prospectus. He also co-hosts, for all you kids out there, a weekly BP podcast about baseball, the Mets, professional wrestling, and other assorted nonsense. Those are his words, not mine. If you have questions for Sydney and or Jarrett, or seek some clarity on some statistical nuance they present, use the chat box. They will monitor it, and there will be time after their formal presentation has concluded to get into Q&A. Sydney, Jarrett, the floor is yours.
All right, can y'all hear me okay? Yeah, okay, I got a thumbs up officially. Hi, everybody. We are excited to be presenting to you today. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm Sydney. Jarrett is my co-presenter. Hi, Jarrett. And we are going to be talking about the Baseball Prospectus Annual Nationals comments a little bit today. We're going to play kind of a fun how well do you know the Nationals game, and as you said, have some time for some questions at the end. Just some brief introductions about ourselves, and my hope is you can see my screen. I'm an, I would say, original-ish Nats fan. My parents are actually on this call, so they can attest to this. But like, we're talking, my sister has a hat signed by Ryan Church, Nationals fan level. As they said, I'm a contributor to Baseball Prospectus, Hardball Times, the Twin Bill, which is a baseball literary magazine. If you're not familiar with it, it's terrific. I am also a novelist. My real areas of interest are player ejections. So I'm really excited for the presentation that's going to be concluding this meeting about player ejections and instant review. And then as well as looking at how well pitch arsenals change with age, including if you can be a one-pitch pitcher forever. Spoilers, you can't. And I'm going to turn it over to Jarrett to introduce himself and talk a little bit about the BP Annual and the Nationals farm system.
Yeah, Sean Doolittle, I think, is hoping that you can be a one-pitch hitter. Like, he's working on a cutter, I believe. I am a Mets fan, so everybody that's muted is probably booing right now. I have like 5 Nationals bobbleheads, the President's Racing one, so I tried to put them in view of the camera behind me. I'm the senior prospect writer at BP. I'm on staff at BP. I co-write the top 10 prospect list, the top 101, which came out about a week and a half ago, which the Nets did better on than they'd done in previous recent years, but still not super great. I almost never write anywhere else. I like very occasionally do outside stuff. I also have a podcast at BP, as mentioned. This is the second time Sydney and I co-wrote the Nationals. I think we did it in 2020. I may have my years screwed up. Sydney and I have been friends for a long time, so we tend to work pretty well together. And sometimes that's not always true for baseball writers, but I think we have similar sensibilities on the writing end of stuff. I tend to come from more like the artsy side of the baseball writing community as opposed to like the hard analytical side. So probably not the best person in the world to give a Nats analytics speech, but I can talk about their farm system. I also wrote the Marlins essay, which is mostly an essay on pitching and changeup development in specific, and a third of the top 101. And my areas of interest are player development and player evaluation and some other stuff. I tend to get really annoyed with like IFA corruption and that kind of stuff. So I do write about some offbeat stuff once in a while too.
All right. Jarrett, I can do the BP annual overview, but you're going to take the farm system one.
Yes.
So we co-wrote, as Jarrett said, the BP annual and player comments. If you're not familiar with the BP annual, it is a very large book. I think I actually have a couple behind me. Hopefully I don't knock everything over in the process. So it is a very large physical book that has stats, player predictions, insider level commentary, as Jarrett said, essays, The Marlins essay, which he wrote, is terrific, which is really on how the Marlins are becoming a pitcher development factory as a kind of organizational identity, particularly for changeup development. BP does have proprietary stats, such as deserved runs created, deserved run average, a lot of the catcher stats. So you really are getting kind of like exclusive stats that we can talk a little bit about as well. And then what we co-wrote are player comments, which are 50 to 200 word blurbs essentially on players that can range from hardcore stats to let's go with more bonkers narrative. And you're going to see a couple of examples of that because we're going to play a how well do you know the Nationals game with some anonymized comments, which is always really fun. But it also has essays, prospect lists, commentary, just like cool stuff. Get the annual, read the annual. It's a good time. But really does contain sort of like what we think is going to happen for the 2022 Nationals. The official like PECOTA predictions, which is the BP proprietary like predictive model, are not out quite yet, but I believe we will be the Nationals will be unburdened by expectations of championship. Let's go with that.
And the preliminary ones I've seen, they're going to be really bad, which I don't think is shocking to any Nationals fan. They have a brighter future than perhaps the present. But yeah, they're Juan Soto is really great. Juan Soto might be the best hitter in all of baseball, and everybody else is terrible. Juan Soto is projected for a 171 DRC plus next year, which DRC plus is on the same kind of scale as WRC plus or OPS plus, although it's a slightly different proprietary BP stat that we think is better. But he's projected as a 71% better than league average hitter for next season. In 599 plate appearances, we project him to be 7.6 wins above replacement, which is almost the exact match for his last season. His projected triple slash is 297, 448, 536. Which is really, really, really good and would also be his lowest on base percentage of the last 3 years. Juan Soto is really great. And yeah, the rest of it, less good.
And yeah, Juan Soto got to be the cover model for this year as well. So that's also very exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, we can certainly talk about like more specific player comments as well and more specific player predictions. But I think the overall tone, Jarrett knows this about me. I like when I'm right, I like to say I'm right very loudly. But I predicted that they would be 5th in the NL East in 2021, and I was right, which was the best thing to come out of last season. But I think that the cracks that we all kind of could see following the World Series are definitely present, and that, like I said, that PECOTA is probably not going to be particularly kind to them. But you know, I also watch the Orioles, so like you can extract fun baseball wherever you can find it.
Yeah, I would guess that they're probably going to end up projecting about 70 wins. I don't know, the PECOTA projections that we put out this year, I suspect are going to be before free agency unfreezes. So they're going to have a much higher delta than our usual February PECOTA projections, just because so many players are still free agents. We actually put a free agent chapter in the book for the first time ever, and I believe this is the 27th annual. I saw somebody in the comments said that they had the initial one, which I think makes you the second person I know of that has that after Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer and Effectively Wild. I'm sure other people out there have it, but I know that's like a highly collected souvenir. But yeah, and I wouldn't really expect the Nationals to do heavy stuff in remaining free agency outside of, I think they've been connected to bringing Schwarber back, but yeah, probably not going to be a Carlos Correa or Chris Bryant destination, although it's got Boris Clients in the Nationals, who knows?
Do you think if we put like a box with a stick on it, we could lure Kyle Seager out of retirement? Like, it's not the Mariners, but like the Mariners are going to be projected better. So I'm going to let Jarrett talk about this because this is his area of expertise, but in particular, we wanted to mention the Nationals farm system.
Yeah, I for the most part wrote the farm system comments in this, and I I know the Nationals farm system very well. I live at the Jersey Shore, which, as was mentioned right before us, there's a lot of snow. I spent the morning blowing about 15 or 16 inches of snow out of my driveway with my new snowblower, which was very exciting. But yeah, the Nationals have their farm teams in leagues I see like all the time. Their farm teams are all pretty much in the Northeast, except for Northeast Mid-Atlantic area. So I see the Nationals farm system all the time. The Nationals have a really long history of swinging big on upside in the draft. They have perpetually taken overdraft slot Scott Boras clients and then cut from the rest of their draft to sign them. Brady House, who is the 2021 first rounder, is another example of exactly that. He was widely projected as one of the top 5 or 6 players in the draft. The Nationals took him at 11, gave him an overslot bonus, and then had to give underslot bonuses. The draft signing bonus pool is pretty much zero sum. You can only go a few points over it before you start getting hit with penalties that teams have not taken yet, although I have actually written articles about how teams should take the draft penalties, which at the extreme are 2 first-round picks, and you can probably sign enough players to make it worth it if you're interested in that. I have written about that in the past, but the Nationals tend to swing really big on upside. That has produced some really big stars, Anthony Rendon, Lucas Giolito. That's also, they also drafted Seth Romero, who at the time was both an injury and a personnel concern. He had gotten kicked off of his college team, and he has barely pitched in the 5 years since he's been drafted. He's just gotten hurt and had an inability to stay on the mound. Their top prospect is Cade Cavalli. He was exactly this kind of high upside pick at number 22. He had a terrible college career until 2020. He had been hurt. He had been a two-way player. He had just never really gotten going on the mound. The 2020 college season was obviously only several weeks long. He looked like the best pitcher in the country for those several weeks. I had a scouting source tell me that they thought he should have been one of the top picks in that draft, but without the confirmation of a full season, nobody was willing to take a shot on him until the Nationals at number 22. He came out this season and he was throwing in the mid to high 90s. I saw him at the Futures game and he was sitting 99 to 101, although it was only for a shorter burst. 2 potentially plus breaking balls, slider, and a curveball. He's one of the top pitching prospects in all of the minors now. He ranked in the top 25 on our 101. He is absolutely fantastic. He still has concerns with throwing strikes. He still has some injury concerns, but he could be a star and he could be on the 2022 Nationals. Some relief risk, some risk he's not going to throw strikes. Brady House, I talked to a little bit. He has some boom or bust offensive potential, some potential hit tool problems, probably going to end up at third base. They drafted him as a shortstop. He could be a star as well if everything works out. The Nationals also recently had a top infield prospect who could have been a star if his bat worked out, and the bat doesn't seem to be working out. So, there's a lot of variability with those type of players. They got back a lot more system depth in the 2021 trades, including Ruiz, who was mentioned in the chat. He is very legit as a catching prospect. Baseball America also released their top prospect list, which I'm supposed to pretend I don't know about, but I actually do. We ranked him number 39. They ranked him in the teens. I think we're a little more conservative than some other outlets on catching prospects in general, just because I've been doing that. This is my 7th season doing this. The bust rate or the attrition rate on catching prospects is just like super high because of the rigors of the position. John Sickles, who used to write for ESPN and SB Nation, coined a phrase called young catcher offensive stagnation syndrome, which is that some really great catching prospects just don't hit in the majors for reasons we cannot really quantify, but it just makes the attrition rate on them so high. Ruiz also has a little bit of a concept called prospect fatigue, which is that I believe this is the 5th list that we have ranked him as one of the top 101 prospects in baseball, which means we've been talking about him as a top prospect since 2017, 2016 even. He was a prominent international free agent in 2015. So I think we kind of just get a little bored. He's just like a really, really good catching prospect. Other than Adley Rutschman, he has the highest chance to be a first division catcher of any catcher in the minors. That being said, he's still a catching prospect. I also got several other catching prospects. I got Riley Adams, who was up last year, and Drew Millis, who's a very good defender. We did get a chat question. What do we think of Josiah Gray? I am really high on Josiah Gray at this point. He just graduated from being a prospect, but he had in some ways shown better breaking stuff in the majors than he had in the minors. In the minors, it looked like his slider and curveball ran together a lot more than they have in the majors. They still have very similar velocity and they have similar horizontal movement profiles, but he gets much more vertical break on his curveball, and it's really fooling hitters because they can't distinguish the two pitches. His fastball was a little hittable when he got called up, and he has had some problems throwing strikes in the majors too. But I'm really optimistic about his chances to be like a number 3 type starter with the possibility for a little bit more. He's the type of a lot more pitchers have been not using changeups nearly as much recently. Gray threw over 95% fastballs and breaking balls in the majors, and that's become a much more effective movement profile for players in the last couple of years than it kind of had been thought to be previously. The like historical knock on players like Gray was if you didn't establish your changeup, you weren't going to be able to get swings and misses at the major league level. And there's a lot more fastball breaking ball pitchers that really aren't doing much else. Tyler Glass now is a really good example of that, of just somebody who spams fastballs and breaking balls. Despite the improvements, the Nationals are still technically a bottom 10 system. I do think that underrates their overall young player talent because of players like Gray and Luis Garcia, both of whom in most organizations probably would still be prospect eligible. The Nationals tend to be really aggressive with letting young players play at the major league level. Garcia, who showed some real signs of improvement last year, is like just barely over the plate appearance threshold, but he's younger than the majority of our top 101 prospects. Not to mention Juan Soto is younger than some of the top 101 prospects. We had a question about Yohan Adon. He looked really good on the last day of the season. Yeah, I watched that game because I was down in my basement where I currently am with 3 TVs in it, watching every game that was meaningful, and that was one of the most meaningful games. Yeah, he looked absolutely great. The Red Sox could not hit his slider at all. He had been previously, before this season, more projected as a future bullpen arm because, you know, he's kind of a big-bodied guy. There's a little effort in the delivery. His changeup's not very good, but if he continues to do what he did in the last game of the season, he's certainly going to be a starting pitcher. And he was real good this season in the minors, like surprisingly good in terms of strike throwing and improvements to his slider. So yeah, I think he's got a real shot to retain in the starting rotation. Yeah, so the Nationals are picking 5th this year in the 2022 draft. The 2022 draft is considered a very good draft. I have absolutely no idea who they're going to pick. So yeah, that's pretty much the Nationals farm system. If anybody has any more questions on the Nationals farm system, I can definitely attempt to answer them. There was a question about a Mariners prospect. I'm going to be honest, I'm not actually that familiar with that Mariners prospect, which yeah, I recall that he went to Maryland, and that's about all I know. The Mariners tend to have West Coast affiliates that I just don't see. So outside of like the top players in their system, I'm a little less familiar. Whereas some of my colleagues like John Troopin or Kevin Johnson would be more familiar with the Mariner system.
And I think there's a question about Garcia. I'm just going to say this, and this is a pure eye test evaluation of him. I mean, he's very young. He made a lot of like that can't happen plays when he was called up because he is very young. I think there was a play where like Escobar was just kind of like this at him. I think that's just a sign of their aggressiveness in promotion. I did see defensive development from him. I'll be honest, I saw more of it from him than certain other players who I'm a little less keen on, who are middle and left side infielders for the Nats. But I think that's an artifact purely of his age, of his experience level, and that I personally saw a lot of progression from him throughout the season, and particularly in the second half of the season. I feel like once the fire sale happened, they played a lot better baseball, even if the win-loss record did not reflect that. And I think he was one of those who frankly, once they weren't trying to do anything, just took it as a learning experience and played a lot better. Yeah, and I think that kind of merges with tanking. I figured that would come up as a question. I would call this a soft tank. In part because I feel like organizationally, if they're not going to give Juan Soto some friends, they know he's walking. And so like they have a very limited window to become competitive or, goodbye, reincarnated Ted Williams. And so I think that's sort of where we're at. I think generally tanking is bad for baseball. I think that there's a lot of things that go on in baseball that are bad for the game. But I would call what the Nationals are doing a more intentional soft tank than, for instance, what certain teams in Baltimore have been doing for a little while.
There was a question about CBA draft order changes too. I highly doubt that would affect the 2022 draft. Generally, when MLB has made changes like that, they've stagnated them a year or two down the line.
So we are definitely going to have some more time for questions, and we're going to keep an eye on the chat. But what we thought would be fun, and this is a game that we have played on a podcast, is we're going to essentially show y'all some of the player comments for the 2022 Nationals. We're going to we anonymize them, so we're going to do like a guess that 2022 National, or I will clarify that some of them might not be on the team in 2022 due to trades and whatever else that might happen, but we're on the 2021 Nationals. So we're gonna do that with some anonymized player comments, and that way you can kind of see what those look like. And then we should have some time left over for more questions. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put out an anonymized comment about a Nationals player on the screen. As I said, some of them are not necessarily gonna be on the team because we can't predict free agency or trades at this point. And obviously everything's been delayed with the lockout. Once we put up the clue, we're gonna have like 45 seconds to a minute to put your answer into the chat. But what we're gonna do is have everybody kind of hit enter on their answer at once. So it's not kind of first person with their hand up gets the right answer. In my other life, I'm a teacher educator, and we do a lot of this. And then when we tell you to hit enter, and the chat will populate with people's guesses. We are going to start with a practice round. So like the first one's going to be pretty straightforward, and then with kind of increasing levels of difficulty. But before we kind of dive into that, what questions do folks have about what we're about to do? Great. So like I said, we're going to start with a practice round. I'm going to start the timer once I start reading the comment. Put your answer in the chat, but don't hit enter till we tell you to. All right, practice round. What does value mean? This player is undoubtedly the most valuable player on the Nationals and possibly in the National League. Finding deficiencies in his game is like looking for an A- on a valedictorian's report card. His slash lines speak for themselves. He missed another batting title by a breath. led the league in walks, somewhat inflated by teams pitching around him, sure, and got his swing right after besting Ohtani in the most compelling and adorable round of the home run derby. He's 23 and is, by all accounts, exactly who he appears. The issue, a Troutonian one, is what a franchise values, what organized baseball values. The Nationals let Harper and Rendon walk and offloaded Turner in a trade that signaled a full rebuild. Player will likely command a significant fraction of $1 billion once he hits free agency, as he should. He's proven his value, unless, of course, what the Nationals value is financial flexibility. All right, get your answer in the chat. And I think everyone can probably hit enter at this point. Yeah, like I said, we wanted to start with a pretty straightforward one. So I think we get the future Met comment feels personal. I'm just gonna say that. I am not opposed to teams buying championships, but Jarrett, you can't have him.
They signed Scherzer, so you never know. I was at that home run derby. That was one of the most incredible sporting events I've ever seen, and specifically the Soto versus Ohtani round. So.
I have rewatched that like you would like a video about puppies when you're feeling bad. Like, to be honest, like I have shown that to non-baseball people. That was something that I really feel is good for the game and compelling. All right, we got the practice round down. They are going to increase in difficulty, don't worry, but same deal. I'll put the comment up. 45 seconds. Everyone hit enter when we tell you. All right. So mystery player 1. 3 is the smallest number of elements needed to form a pattern. Anthony Rendon, an MVP caliber left side infielder for the Nationals, wore number 6. Trey Turner, an MVP caliber left side infielder for the Nationals, wore number 7. This player, a left side infielder for the Nationals, certainly wears number 8, but that's about where comparisons with his former teammates end. Player lacks Rendon's production at the plate, as well as Turner's sparkling defense. He made modest improvements in hitting for power in 2021, though anything above his 2020 ISO, 0.01, would be. He profiles most similarly to another previous Nationals player, Tyler Moore, which is a big 9. All right, get your answers in the chat. Got about 5 more seconds. All right, hit enter. Yeah, I am not keen on Carter Kieboom. I know Jarrett and I have had some discussions about him over the years. The bat is obviously a problem. He hit in the 2019 PCL. I could hit in the 2019 PCL, like that doesn't say anything. It was a racquetball, like, and on the West Coast. But what actually I consider his biggest demerit is his defense, because defense is workable. Like you work hard, you get better at it. And I don't see sort of an improvement trajectory the way I did for like Garcia. So I don't know, Jarrett, you can disagree. I know we've historically disagreed about him, but
I am no longer a believer in his ability to hit much, and that's not good because that's the thing he was supposed to be best at. The toughest thing for us to do in player evaluation is to evaluate a player's hit tool, ability to hit for average, because it has cascade effects down the line. If you don't hit for average, you don't get on base. If you don't hit for average, you don't hit for game power. And the best predictor of whether a player is going to hit for average is whether they've hit for average. And he's a career 197 hitter at this point, and like what's creeping up on a full season's worth of playing time. So we ranked him in the top 20 twice, but that was based on the idea that he would be like a 280, 290, 300 hitter, and he's not. So yeah, starting to lose, because there also like hasn't really been a lot of signs that that's going to improve. He just like kind of hits the ball weakly into the ground a lot, which isn't great. So sorry, I can't be a little more optimistic on that. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have been more optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's being called Kibust in the chat, which I think is fair. You know, I think we want to see him this year. Maybe he's, you know, worked on it. I'm certain that it's not a mystery to him. And I think that their drafting and acquisitions have made it pretty clear that he's competing for a position the same way that Robles is kind of competing for a position that was once guaranteed for him.
And Robles was a player I liked a lot more I mean, Robles was the #2 prospect in baseball for us a year ago. But yeah, both of them kind of have the same problem, which is that they don't hit the ball in the air enough and they don't hit it hard enough when they do. And in modern baseball, those tend to be the two things that produce offensive value. And it's not great.
Yeah, and I mean, how do I put this? Like it was Robles versus Michael A, and we all had a fondness and an affection for Michael A. And at this point, they would have been better sticking with him. But I'm pretty high on Lane Thomas, obviously in the time that we saw him, which was a limited sample or whatever. But I think that is, again, he's competing. Robles is competing for the position. His defense is great. It is not as good as it was in 2019, because he beefed up in 2020 trying to hit for more power, lost a lot of his speed, and then slimmed down in 2021 and didn't kind of retain that speed. I think he, I saw signs of at least working on it. He was in Lidom in 2020, like specifically to kind of work on stuff. I don't know. I don't think he was this year, or in 2021, but like we'll see. My hope is that he sort of finds his identity. We're going to do a couple more. I know we're about at time, so we don't want to kind of run over, but we're going to do at least one more of these. So mystery player 2, irreplaceable, was the #1 hit in 2007 when this player first signed with Cleveland. Over the next 14 years, he proved eminently replaceable with a Homeric transaction page and permanent status as the fringiest of fringe players. The Nationals signed him as a stopgap starter in late 2020 and then to a minor league deal in 2021. He's shown in the first half with a strike-to-walk ratio driven by a low occurrence of free passes. He gave up 4 walks in 18 games from April through June, which is particularly impressive given his junk baller arsenal. Steel regression stepped in July and August, dropping him from elite-ish to merely serviceable. But anything above replacement was a win, and player is likely to find placement on a major league roster in the coming season. All right, y'all have about 1 more second. All right, yep, hit enter. All right, yeah. Not Manny Ramirez. Yeah, that is my guy, Paulo Espino. Jarrett swears this didn't happen, but I swear it did. I got a text or a DM early in the season that just said, "What's a Paulo Espino?"
It was from me.
It was from you.
I actually looked. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked back and I actually found it. I think he was pitching against the Mets like really early in the season. Yeah, I'd forgotten he existed basically because he was, as Sydney wrote, the fringiest of fringe players.
I thought that him versus Kershaw was like my favorite matchup of the season because everyone's like, "Who is this?" And I'm like, I have a very specific knowledge base, and it's about like older junk ball players. I imprinted on Livan Hernandez like a little duckling, and that's what I've loved ever since. So I think that I hope he ends up on a roster this next season because I'm pretty like high on him, and I think he's a really cool story about baseball. All right, I know we're running over. We can certainly take 1 or 2 more questions if folks have them. And then, or we can turn it over to the next set of presenters.
We had predictions for the BP annual cover in 2023. My prediction would be Wander Franco because he's really good. He tends to provide player value in the sorts of baseball prospectus-y ways, and he's really good. We tend to more often focus on like young, analytically favorable players like Soto, and I think Franco has a pretty good chance to be that in 2022. But yeah, it could be almost anybody. A lot of times this is a little secret of the BP annual process. It's a lot of times based on the best picture we can clear, not the player necessarily.
That's scandalous.
Yeah.
All right. Like I said, we're happy to answer a couple more questions. I'll certainly be sticking around to hear about player ejections because I'm very interested in that, but we appreciate folks' time and interest.
Yes, there will be a digital edition of the BP. It should be available within the next week or two. Yeah, I can get a firmer answer on that from Craig Goldstein, probably. But yeah, there should be a digital edition.
There's a question about Lane Thomas. I personally, I mean, he was not hitting for the Cardinals, and turning like John Lester, who was on his last efforts, into Lane Thomas was actually a pretty impressive trade, because I think they were expecting nothing from that trade and anything was good. I don't know if it was he needed a change in scenery. I don't know if he just needed more opportunities than he was getting on the Cardinals. But his sprint speed in particular is really impressive. Like, I think he's, Jarrett, you can probably cite the actual number, but he's very fast.
Yeah.
And I think that was, was slated to make him a really good defender. And that's kind of Cardinals' identity. But whatever they said to him when he got to DC seemed to have changed his bat, because he was bad. And same thing for Riley Adams. Obviously not a outfielder, but was not hitting on the Jays, and then either needed a change of scenery, more opportunity, or just being unburdened by really having to succeed as a team. I think actually does sometimes produce better baseball. So I don't know if it was psychological or that they had a specific sort of hitting, Kevin Long, bless him, he's gone now, but I don't know if he kind of fixed them or if they just kind of needed it, but I think that they're both projected to be much better than anticipated for being traded for essentially nothing. Because it was like 2 weeks of Brad Hand, and then he ended up on the Mets somehow.
All right, let's give our thanks to Sydney and Jarrett. They've a slam bang start to our conference. Clap your hands, thumbs up in the reactions file. It was great stuff. Thank you again. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. As cold as it is, snowy as it is, but time marches on.
Thank you, everybody, for having us.
Oh, thank you for agreeing. It was great. When you're having a chapter meeting via Zoom, not only do you not have to travel, but neither do our speakers, even when the subject of the talk focuses on the nation's capital. In this case, baseball and the American presidency. We will get to eavesdrop on a conversation between two historians, one we know quite well. In the great state of New York, we have John Thorn, Major League Baseball's official historian. He's the original editor of the National Pastime and has also edited Total Baseball, the Armchair Book of Baseball, and the whole baseball catalog. He's also the author of A Century of Baseball Lore, Baseball's Greatest Games, Champion Batsman of the 20th Century, and Baseball in the Garden of Eden. And that's just the books I have in my collection. John also writes Our Game, the ongoing series of columns about baseball history. And from the equally noteworthy state of Indiana is Craig Fehrman, a journalist and presidential historian. He's the author of Author-in-Chief, The Untold Story of Our Presidents and Their Books, which the Wall Street Journal called, quote, one of the best books on the American presidency to appear in recent years, unquote. He lives in Indiana with his wife and 2 children and roots for the Reds. But he is scheduled to make an appearance in Washington 2 weeks from today on February the 12th at the Politics and Prose bookstore in Washington at Connecticut and Nebraska Avenues Northwest, presumably to talk about his new book. And if I may, a tale John told me to whet your appetites. Having staged 28 games overseas since leaving home on November 1st, the Spalding tourists arrived in New York City on April 6th, 1889. Only a day earlier, the national news divulged that President Benjamin Harrison was exhibiting conspicuously on a mantelpiece in the White House a large baseball scorecard. To a visitor, this demonstrated conclusively that, quote, the administration was all right, for it endorsed the game of baseball, unquote. Questions for either fellow? Go in the chat box. Gentlemen, take it away. Craig, John, where are you? Oh, there you are.
I'm doing well. Thank you for that introduction, Mark, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I do feel like I need to underline my baseball credentials. That yes, I was very excited to write a book, and that was a big career highlight. But I've never been more excited than when I got to write the chapter on the Cincinnati Reds for Baseball Prospectus a few years back. And I focused on how lucky they had been to have their pitching prospects hit, like Cueto and Chapman, and how it seemed like everything was really going as well as it possibly could. Unfortunately, those prospects haven't really been hitting since. But I'm a huge baseball fan and of course, a huge history fan, and I'm really excited to talk with John today. We're going to kind of work through the chronology of the presidency and talk about some bigger picture things, but also talk about specific presidents and their relationship to baseball. And I actually think that the place to start is at the beginning, because one thing I've learned from John's work is that the history of presidents and baseball is as old as the history of the presidency itself. So I wanted to ask about George Washington. I know there's a story that John has used in his work where a French observer during the Revolutionary War looked at Washington and said, he sometimes throws and catches a ball for whole hours with his aides de camp. So what game was George Washington playing, and what can you tell us about his relationship to that game?
Greg, wonderful to be on with you and folks out in the dark. Glad to be with you as well. The game that Washington was playing was certainly not baseball, though later observers have credited him with playing baseball at Valley Forge. The game was wicket, which was a primitive version of cricket that was exported from England to the colonies probably in the 1710s, 1720s. And when cricket advanced and had the Marylebone rules of 1744, the primitive game vanished in England, but continued in America. And wicket continued to be the favorite game, not only of Americans in the Northeast, but also of certain presidents, going all the way up to James Garfield, who played wicket at Hiram College. Washington's athletic ability is known, but to claim that he was a cricketer or a baseballist would be wrong.
It's a pretty tantalizing mention, though, of baseball in Valley Forge. Can you expand on that detail as well?
Baseball had no role at Valley Forge. Baseball, we know, dates in North America to the 18th century. We have it appearing in Pittsfield, Massachusetts through an ordinance barring its play within 80 yards of a newly constructed church and meeting house. We have it being played at Princeton in 1786. And we have old New Englanders testifying that they played a game which they called round ball or baseball. Round ball, not because the ball was round, but because the bases were run in the round as a circuit. And that would be as early as 1735. So what does Valley Forge in particular have to do with the history of baseball? Nothing.
It sounds like we should file this right next to Washington and the cherry tree in terms of American stories too good to be true.
Absolutely, and the Rappahannock and all of that. And,
Sure.
and Craig, I just want to say that it's terrific to be with you as a presidential historian, which I am not. I am a historian of popular culture in America, and on a scattered basis, I will dig down into what interests me, and the presidency has been one of those things.
Sure. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the fascinating things about the presidency, at least the way I look at it, is that it is a form of popular culture, and it is a part of the popular culture. And one of the themes I think that'll come out as we continue to talk today is how much the presidency, even when presidents are talking about baseball or fans of baseball, it's sort of the changes in their relationship to the sport are very similar to the changes that are happening in the broader culture.
You bet. And the idea of celebrity culture infecting the presidency, well, we have seen this to the umpteenth degree with the former guy.
Sure. Yeah. Infecting is unfortunately the word for it. I know that you talk a little bit about Jefferson and John Adams and their relationship to baseball or a game similar to baseball. And I just noticed something that you quoted John Adams's diary when he writes and talks about playing baseball. He calls about, or at least he calls it a game called bat and ball. I guess we can't be more precise than that. But I thought it was interesting. A lot of my work looked at presidents as writers. And so John Adams, many people don't know this, but these histories of various cultural traditions are longer than we know. John Adams was the first president to write an autobiography, you know, the kind of book that Barack Obama had come out last year. And in Adams's autobiography, he actually removed the mention of bat and ball. He used the diary as the basis for his autobiography, and a lot of that paragraph is just transposed almost word for word. But for some reason, Adams dropped the mention of bat and ball. So I don't know how much we can read into it, but at least he mentioned it in the diary, so we know that he was aware of it.
I think there's one thing we can say, Craig, and that's the fact that Adams dropped it from the diary when writing his autobiography testifies to the ubiquity of bat and ball games.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was nothing worthy of special mention. That what Adams referred to as bat and ball may have been a game played in Massachusetts and Connecticut called bat ball, or it may have been any one of a number of variants.
Sure. It also tells us a little bit about how Adams was trying to present himself, I think, to posterity, because there's not a book John Adams read that he wasn't willing to mention 3 different times in the autobiography just to get himself a little bit of credit for that. And one of my favorite passages in the autobiography is where he assures his children, you don't need to worry that you have half brothers or half sisters out there. I was faithful to your mother, and I just want to make sure that that's in the historical record. So John Adams has space for that kind of stuff, space for bat and ball, maybe not. There's another important president, and we should caveat this as an important president in terms of presidents in baseball, not an important president in terms of much else, but that's James Buchanan. One of the most interesting things in your research has been talking about peace medals, which of course were something that presidents, again, going all the way back to Washington, would use as a sort of symbolic marker, but they were important too. That it wasn't just symbolism. They had real negotiating and political value when they interacted with native tribes. And so Lewis and Clark, that's actually what I'm working on right now, is a book about Lewis and Clark. And Lewis and Clark used peace medals with Thomas Jefferson's face on them and used them as an important form of transaction when they met with various tribal nations. But James Buchanan's peace medal, which they were still being made in 1857, is a really interesting one. And I wondered if you could explain why it's so important to us.
Sure. The Buchanan Peace Medal actually extended into the Lincoln administration. Lincoln had 2 peace medals, and the first one was the Buchanan model. And here is a lovely image of it. And I'll call to your attention the savagery around the perimeter and the amelioration of savagery in the center. So you have an Indian wearing a headdress behind a plow, which is hilarious. And if you look to the left, you'll see a frame house with children playing a game of bat and ball. And this was engraved by Joseph Wilson, who died in the very year the peace medal was issued. But this frontier depiction of a bat and ball game has an Americanizing feature, that this is one of the things that would make a warlike nation into a domesticated one, is powerfully symbolic. This is absolutely my favorite presidential piece. And the detail of it is all to emphasize that baseball was part of what we thought of as distinctly American in 1857. Only 1 year earlier in New York City, a convention of metropolitan area baseball clubs declared that baseball was becoming, or was already, the national pastime, which was hilarious because it was only being played in the Northeast by New York rules, which were still in the process of adjustment. The game at that time was not played to 9 innings. There were not 9 men on the field necessarily. The distance between the base paths was not yet 90 feet. So the standardization of baseball as a national pastime had not yet come, but the Indian Peace Medal testifies to how baseball had already been ingrained in the American culture.
Sure. And I think this is also a place where we can see that baseball and the presidency reflect a lot bigger things that are happening in the culture at the time. I'm going to use the terms from the period. They're certainly not the terms I would use or probably anyone would use today, but there was this idea of savagery versus civilization. And the goal, I mean, obviously there are plenty of instances of American presidents doing brutal things to native tribes. But if you look at the best academic research on people like Washington or Jefferson, they thought that they were being helpful because their goal was to replace savagery with civilization. Again, the terms of the time. And it's just fascinating to me that in this coin, we see a plow and we see a native person in a headdress with the plow, which again is a transition from a certain kind of economy, like a hunter-gatherer economy, to an agricultural economy. That's one of the big ways that civilization was being pushed. But baseball is held up in the same kind of area there. It's both baseball and farming, and there's a church steeple back there. These are all kind of markers, even in 1857, of quote unquote civilization and the kind of civilization process that was being pushed by the American presidents.
Craig, I agree with you entirely. And if one were to create an iconographic history of baseball, this would be a paramount piece because this represents what we today call an inflection point.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing some great questions in here about different presidents, and a lot of them I think we're going to touch on. But one that I wanted to call out was from Gordon Janis, where he says that, possibly the bat and ball game had a negative stereotype, and that's why Adams dropped the mention of it in the autobiography. Adams was definitely worried about presenting himself as scholarly and sophisticated. Do you think, John, that bat and ball more broadly was sort of seen negative, and maybe John would say, I fished when I was a boy, but I didn't play bat and ball?
No, although Jefferson said something very close to that. He fished, he hunted, but he did not play games of ball because they were too aggressive. There is something to be said for that, but I believe the scorn that may have been heaped on young males playing games of bat and ball would not have related to children, but rather to adolescents and men in their 20s who had begun to play ball among themselves by that point.
Sure. So there's some great tidbits in the chat about other presidents. And like I said, we'll get to some of them, but I feel like if we're doing an event about presidents, we have to spend some time with Lincoln. Maybe that's my Midwestern bias talking, but John, your research has some really interesting details about Lincoln playing ball in Illinois in the 1830s. What can you tell us about Honest Abe as an athlete?
In truth, Lincoln was a better handball player than he was a baseball player, though there is some evidence that he played a town ball variant sometime in the 1840s and 1850s. The Albert Spalding sponsored Legend of America's National Game, the book he issued in 1911, was that Lincoln had learned of his ascension to the Republican nomination for president while he was playing baseball and told the couriers that they would have to wait until he got another hit. This is complete balderdash. Is of the sort that Bill Stern, the old radio host famous for fabulous lies, he had Abner Doubleday at the Lincoln deathbed, and Lincoln's last words were said to have been, "Keep baseball going, Abner. The nation needs it." Of course, after Lincoln was shot, he never uttered another word. He was shot on the 14th. He died on the 15th. And in one of the great documentary bloopers that I became aware of, apart from those in baseball with Ken Burns, was in the Civil War. We had originally Lincoln dying on April 14th, but that was the date he was shot, not the day he died.
Well, Lincoln, we talked about Washington and the cherry tree earlier, and Lincoln is even more susceptible in his afterlife to those kinds of stories. One of the things I used the most in my own work was this book. It's a good 800 pages, and it was put together by a couple Lincoln scholars, and they just try to gather every quotation attributed to Lincoln, and then they rate it. It's almost like a 5-star system where it's like, Lincoln definitely said this, Lincoln probably didn't say this, and most of the things in that book are probably too good to be true, which makes it a challenge to write serious stuff about Lincoln, but it also shows, I think, how much he captured the hearts and minds of the American people for so long.
Well, I have great respect for the legend and the lore associated with American historical figures. And one of the things when we were making the baseball film, when we had some talking head say something that was factually not true, we would all yell out, "That fact is too good to check." Have held that as a motto throughout my professional life.
Sure.
There are some facts that, America is a metronome between Barnum and Lincoln, and the Barnum side is every bit as valid as the Lincoln.
Sure, that makes sense. I actually wanted to jump forward now to post-Civil War, because all the baseball fans with us today know that was a time when the sport began to be standardized and professionalized. We get famous teams like the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings. But what's interesting is that presidents were changing right along with everyone else. One of the details in your work talks about Rutherford B. Hayes and how he and his son kept a scrapbook tracking the rise of that Red Stockings team. So what can you tell us post-Civil War, as baseball took a big step towards its modern form? How were presidents changing as fans and consumers of the sport?
Well, baseball's presidents became less noteworthy for baseball figures because of how they may have played the game. And instead, it was rather how they followed the game. So presidents as baseball fans came in with Andrew Johnson watching the Excelsiors and the Nationals, the Washington Nationals, playing on the white lot behind the White House in 1866, and then greeting the Mutuals, and I forgot the other team, it may have been the Atlantics, in 1867. And then you go to U.S. Grant, who never attended a baseball game while he was president. But as a former president, he was there on opening day when the Giants launched their National League career at the Polo Grounds. I believe the date is May 1st, 1880.
Yeah, and that would have been quite a get for the Giants, because Grant was so famous at that point. He was perhaps one of the most famous people in the world, not just from the presidency, but from his time in the military. And, right around the corner was him writing his best-selling book. And he was a huge celebrity and a huge fixture in New York's culture at that time. So you can start to see that having him in the stands, that's big news, in addition to the game being big news itself. One president that I always think of when I think of sports and the presidency is, of course, Teddy Roosevelt. But interestingly, he didn't have much time for baseball. I'm going to read a quote from one of your stories from his daughter, Alice. And Alice said of Teddy Roosevelt, "Father and all of us regarded baseball as a mollycoddle game. Tennis, football, lacrosse, boxing, polo, yes, they are violent, which appealed to us. But baseball, Father wouldn't even watch it, not even at Harvard." Is there anything more to say about Teddy and his relationship to baseball, or was this view of baseball versus boxing more widely held, or is this just another TR idiosyncrasy?
I think you got to chalk it up to TR, because it was the most popular sport in America from the 1880s on. The country was baseball mad. And that's, Mark launched us with an anecdote about Benjamin Harrison having a scorecard on his mantle, and a newspaper report saying, well, I guess that the president is all right, because he has borne the stamp of baseball, and baseball was the one thing that everybody could agree about in a fractious society, more fractious than today's. And baseball was not only a civilizing factor in the 1850s. It was a uniting factor in the 1880s and 90s, even as baseball seemed to trail college football and bicycling and tennis and any number of other sports in terms of popular participation. So Teddy Roosevelt was the first to earn a gold lifetime pass from the National League, and that was in 1907. And he greeted some teams, the Cubs, the Washington Senators, or maybe it was the White Sox and the Senators in the White House, but he never really cared for baseball. And he handed off to a man who did.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that man, but let's talk about him a little bit differently than just in terms of baseball. And for anyone who's interested in what we're talking about, we're only touching on a little bit of John's research. I've put the 3 articles that we're kind of basing this talk on in the chat box, so you can save those and read those for later. They're well worth your time. They're richly illustrated. I had such a good time reading them as we prepared for this. But speaking of Roosevelt, speaking of Wilson, it's worth pulling back for a second and noting that the presidency itself was changing in this time period. It's really easy for us to think, we know how central the presidency is to American life today, and we know how central George Washington is to American history, and just assuming that everything happened in the middle followed that same kind of rubric. But that's just simply not true. For long stretches in the 19th century, the president was one of the least interesting people in Washington. Woodrow Wilson, before he was a president, he was a baseball player, as has been mentioned in the chat, and a baseball fan, but he was also a historian and a really celebrated professor. And in one of his books, he wrote, quote, "The business of the president, occasionally great, is usually not much above routine." Another scholar that Wilson really admired compared the president to sort of a kind of managerial person at a middle grade railroad in the middle of the country. So this idea that the president was somebody who could set an agenda and capture the national imagination and use the bully pulpit, that just simply wasn't true for so much of the American presidency. That started to change with Teddy Roosevelt and especially with Woodrow Wilson. Those were, once Wilson switched from being professor to being president, he developed a different view of what the executive branch could achieve. And so I guess I just wonder that at this time when the president is becoming so much more visible and so much more influential and so much more powerful, could we see that in the presidency in baseball too? Is the early 20th century when we start to see more presidents throwing out first pitches or presidents, being celebrated for being at games? How does the baseball presidency change at a time when the actual political presidency is changing as well?
When Roosevelt handed off to William Howard Taft in 1908, Taft then became the first man to throw out a pitch on opening day of a Major League Baseball.
Fascinating.
In 1910, April 1910. I believe that Harrison had been asked to do that, and there was a box and bunting prepared for him, and there were various members of the cabinet who were there, and Harrison just never showed up. Otherwise, we'd be talking about him a little more and Taft a little less. Taft's connection to baseball is largely through his brother, who was a part owner of both the Cubs and the Phillies, and possibly even had a piece of the Reds. This was at a time when syndicate baseball, multiple ownership of ball clubs, was a pox upon the land. Wilson, the administrator, the clerk, the backroom guy, was followed by Harding, who had actually owned a Class D minor league baseball team in Ohio. It was Coolidge who made famous the idea of the president being the guy who needs to get out of the way. Business run America. And Coolidge was a baseball president of the old sort, of the Millard Fillmore sort. That you didn't much care who he was or what he did. His position was in some measure ceremonial and some measure administrative. This really changed after Coolidge, when Herbert Hoover, through inaction when action was called for, allowed the country to drift into depression. And that maybe now we can talk about Roosevelt.
Sure. Well, I actually want to talk about Coolidge because I always think he's a more fascinating figure than he's given credit for. Somebody in the comments was mentioning that this change in the presidency and the change in the baseball presidency were due to the modern media, and that's definitely true. There were a lot of changes happening, especially radio. We always think of FDR as the radio president, but Coolidge was the one who did it first. So if you're interested in the presidency and these kind of contours, one thing I try to do in my book is, it's not just a recitation of the books presidents have written. It's not a book report. It's a cultural history that looks at all these different changes and how the media is changing and how history is changing and how reading is changing all alongside the presidents and tries to keep them front and center. But I actually do tell one baseball story in my book, and at the risk of cannibalizing my sales, I think I'll share it with you guys real quickly. This is in a chapter I wrote about Coolidge and about sort of the rise of modern celebrity. And it's a story about Babe Ruth. So there was a reporter who was at a Yankees game, and it was, during batting practice beforehand, and reporters were still allowed to go down there and chat. And so a reporter is just talking with Babe Ruth. And so the reporter asked Ruth, what books are you reading? And Ruth replied, reading isn't good for a ball player. It's not good for his eyes. So the reporter sort of rolled his eyes a little bit and said, you've got to do some reading here. Who are your favorite authors? So Babe Ruth said, my favorite Arthurs, Neff, and Fletcher. So the reporter let out a sigh and said, not Arthurs, authors, writers. And Babe Ruth replied, my favorite writer is Christy Walsh. And Christy Walsh is a really interesting name in terms of both baseball and in terms of celebrity and I guess literary production would be the term of it in American history, because Walsh set up a syndicate. He basically had a 5-man rotation of ghostwriters at one point. And in the 1920s, when Americans really became obsessed with celebrity and obsessed with celebrity in a new way, Walsh was the one who linked writers with celebrities like Babe Ruth and used them to ghostwrite their columns. And this was so prominent a practice in the 1920s that the Washington Post was frustrated with the other papers in the Washington area because they would use just way too much ghostwriting. So the slogan they used was "Reach for a post, not a ghost." Just trying to say, we're not the ghostwritten newspaper. We're the newspaper that gives you actual sports writing and great columnists and all the other stuff that's so well beloved about Washington sports writing history. But the 1920s are such an interesting period because people like Babe Ruth, and a lot of this really started in baseball because the celebrities in baseball were bigger than the celebrities anywhere else. You started to see ghostwriting and this real focus on cultivating image and projecting image. And Coolidge is so interesting because I feel like one reason he was so popular, and people forget how beloved he was as a president, one reason he was so popular is he could balance the old form of celebrity with the new form of celebrity. So he could appear to be, the kind of return to the old baseball president that John was talking about. But Coolidge was also very willing to go to his family farm in Vermont and put on his grandfather's clothes and hold a pitchfork so the reporters could get pictures of him working on a farm. Coolidge understood, he was an old school guy himself, but he also understood how in this new world with so many changes, being old school, being authentic was a great way to sell yourself and your policies. And so in this crazy time of celebrity and culture and this explosion in interest, John, I'm wondering, did that happen for a baseball fan like FDR? Were they changing and becoming more obsessed with not just baseball, but specific baseball players?
In FDR's case, no, he had never been much in the athletic line. So he was the club secretary in a celebrated pose of the Groton School Baseball Club of 1898. And when he was working in a law firm in Manhattan, he was sometimes accused of inattention to his work because he needed to get up to the Polo Grounds to see the Giants play. So he was a baseball fan. We have, I think, a picture of FDR with a bat over his shoulder, leading baseball players in march in a drill, with all of them pretending their baseball bats were rifles. And this would be, 1918 perhaps? Polio, of course, came in shortly thereafter. And FDR, in part because of the length of his presidency, threw out more first pitches than anyone. He threw out 8. And this was despite incredible difficulties in getting to the park, difficulties in perching himself while he threw the ball. He was never photographed from the waist down for wide distribution. And he remained a baseball fan, and his great contribution to the game was the green light letter to Commissioner Landis in 1942, telling him that he must keep baseball going, that baseball was, if not a vital industry in that classical notion, it was vital to the American psyche.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, throwing those first pitches is an example of FDR being able to use that celebrity and being able to kind of, there just became such an interest in the personal. You know, in the 19th century, people were famous for what they achieved. People wanted to know, oh, a baseball player is a great hitter or pitcher. Well, that's why they're famous. But in the 20th century, it became, well, sure, Babe Ruth is a great hitter, but I want to know, you know, who he's running around town with. I want to know what he likes to eat. I want to know who his favorite authors are, or favorite authors. So that kind of shift, you can see, it makes sense for presidents too. I want to know, does my president like baseball? And that becomes an important part. I want to talk about Nixon really quickly, because I just found his relationship to baseball probably closer than to a lot of the people who are with us today for this event, his obsession with baseball history. I don't know a lot about politics, Nixon once said, but I know a lot about baseball. So can you explain to us how much Nixon knew about baseball and how carefully he evaluated and studied its history?
Nixon was exceptional in his knowledge of baseball history, and he was one who would compile all-time teams. And his son-in-law, David Eisenhower, was also an expert, and it was not because Ike had played professional ball, presumably under a pseudonym of Wilson, with Abilene in the Kansas State League of 1910. There is no record to substantiate this, but Ike was a terrific player. And if I may kick back to Eisenhower for just a moment,
Sure.
Continuing with Nixon, there's the famous anecdote, which I dare to repeat, that Dwight Eisenhower and a pal were fishing by a riverside, and the pal asked, what would you want to be when you grow up? And Ike said, I want to be a great ball player like Hannes Wagner. What do you want? And his pal said, I want to be president of the United States. And as Ike wrote in later life, neither of us got our wish. A great story. Whether it is true or not is beyond checking. And those who might choose to check, I don't want to know you.
Sure. Too good to check. Too good to check.
Back to Nixon. 1969 was a year when the All-Star game was rained out, or he would have been there to throw out the first pitch. I believe that there was a 100th anniversary celebration of the Cincinnati Red Stockings, which of course is the 100th anniversary of professional baseball, though not really, because there were professionals before Cincinnati. And there was a selection of an all-time team. So Nixon and David Eisenhower were involved in these two. And Joe DiMaggio was named the greatest living player, which he was not. But he always wished to be referred to when introduced to a crowd as the greatest living player. Nixon was briefly considered, even after Watergate, as a prospective replacement commissioner of baseball. The political downside of this was evident, and it didn't get very far. But we have never had a president who knew as much about baseball's past as Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Sure. Let's jump forward a little bit just to make sure we have time to get to it and talk about George H.W. Bush. Maybe not as much baseball knowledge, but certainly a surfeit of baseball skill. What can you tell us about his playing career at Yale?
He was a light hitting, fancy fielding first baseman. He had no real prospect of ever playing in the major leagues, except I think it may have been during the Cracker Jack All-Star game, or it may have been a little later, where Milt Pappas grew to pitch to him, and though he hadn't swung a bat in years, he was able to line a single to center. And we have the famous photo of Bush and Babe Ruth on Yale Field in 1947. Bush's sidekick, Ronald Reagan, was a terrific player and a radio announcer for ball games, and played Grover Cleveland Alexander in the 1952 film with Doris Day.
Yeah, and Reagan was also wrote a lot about sports too. There's obviously the stories about him announcing and filling time when they lost the connection in terms of the updates of the baseball game. But he wrote a weekly sports column for a long time as well, covering that stuff. You mentioned that Babe Ruth, George H.W. Bush picture, and it's a great one. But the thing that they're passing back and forth, the reason Babe Ruth was there is because he was donating his autobiography to Yale's library. Right. And so that's exactly what we were talking about. It's the Christy Walsh ghostwritten autobiography. Ruth is donating the manuscript to Yale, and the player they picked to meet him just happened to be someone who would go on to have ghostwritten books of his own many years and one White House stint later. We don't have much time, but looking through the comments, different presidents have come up. We've touched on some of them, but George W. Bush obviously had a strong interest in baseball from the administrative side. I don't know if you want to talk about him. I don't know if you want to talk about Obama or Trump and their relationship to baseball.
Sure. Why don't we look at George Bush, whose ownership of the lead as the managing partner of the ownership group of the Texas Rangers puts him in a unique baseball position. But Bush, if we remember him for a baseball connection, it is for throwing out the first pitch after 11. And he warmed up, but he had been throwing on the sidelines for weeks in order not to embarrass himself, as I once did, by bouncing the ball up to the plate. Donald Trump was a decent ball player at the New York Military Academy, which is just down the road from where I live in Catskill. And he, of course, buttressed his credentials, which were slim, batting average in the low 200s, to make himself an All-American prospect, and that he was a certain major leaguer if he hadn't instead wished to go make money. This is part of the myth-making machine, not only behind Trump, but perpetuated by Trump himself.
Sure.
Biden was not a bad ball player in high school, but football was his sport more so than baseball.
As much as it's possible to compare across eras and iterations of baseball, which president was the best athlete in terms of baseball, do you think?
I think it's got to be George Herbert Walker Bush. His son George threw like a real player from around, but the one who's got real credentials would be either Eisenhower or George Herbert Walker Bush.
Sure. One last question before we hand things back to Mark. Kennedy's name has come up with a lot of great anecdotes in the chat, and I have a special interest in Kennedy because that was a big chapter in my book, and I got a lot of media attention for some new stuff I found about Kennedy. Much of it, let's say, in the realm of myth making and too good to check, except I actually went to the Kennedy Library and checked it. What can you tell us about Kennedy and his relationship to baseball as we wrap up?
Like George Bush of the Rangers, he threw well. He threw left-handed. So as I recall, left-handed, and you may correct me, I could be wrong on this. Kennedy looked like a ball player. That he cared about baseball, I'm not certain.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for all the information and the anecdotes you've shared with us, and for giving us a couple opportunities to connect baseball and presidents to the broader story of American history. There's even more connections we can draw. And earlier in the chat, I posted the links to 3 of John's stories. They're well worth checking out if you want to know more about this. And there's a lot of great anecdotes in the chat as well. It's up to you to decide whether you want to check these anecdotes or just enjoy them. But Mark, we'll throw it back to you with that.
Thank you,
Craig.
Craig. Thank you, John. And hail to the Chiefs of this presentation. Clap your hands, ladies and gentlemen. A terrific presentation. I am glad that they were able to join us this very morning. Our next speaker is someone many of you who now cheer for the Nationals will fondly remember. Its first closer, Chad Cordero. That first season that Washington had been transplanted from Montreal, the Nats actually made a sustained charge for the NL East flag, and Chad was a large part of it. His all-star season in 2005 included a league-leading 47 saves, a 1.84 ERA, and an ERA plus of 2.25 in 74 games and 74 in the third innings pitched. He stayed in Washington until 2008, assembling a 20-14 record, 128 saves, and a 2.78 ERA. Chad turns the big 4-0 in March. Now remember, if you've got a question, use the chat function. Our chapter president, Peter Cottrell, will lead this session. So Pete and Chad, go for it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys inviting me on and allowing me to join you guys. I wish I would have caught that other presentation. I only caught the last couple minutes of it, but it sounded pretty interesting. But yeah, anytime I have a chance to speak to fans or speak to anybody who loves talking about baseball or even baseball history, I love doing it. So thank you again for inviting me on, and I really appreciate it. You know that the Nationals, they still hold a really big place in my heart. You know, that's where I set my career off. Yes, I was drafted by the Montreal Expos, but you know, I only spent 1 year in Montreal, and the majority of my career was in Washington. So being able to help that franchise get off the ground again, be a part of that first team, it was a pretty special feeling. And you know, I'm very grateful and for the fact that I was able to be a part of that. You know, playing at RFK wasn't always the funnest, but it had so much character that no matter how old it was, no matter how many deficiencies it had, it was still a great place to play. And anytime you have a chance to play in the nation's capital, I mean, you really can't beat that with all the history from, being able to meet ambassadors, representatives, going to the Pentagon and stuff like that. It was a very enjoyable time for myself. So once again, thank you for having me on.
Chad, we really appreciate your taking the time to join us today. I was wondering, you mentioned you starting with the Expos, and I guess you became the closer with them in 2004, their last season. What was that experience like? I think you started as a setup man and then ended up as the closer.
Yeah, when I first got called up in 2003, most relievers when they get brought up to the big leagues, they start off as mop-up men. So anytime a starter can't make it through the second or third inning, that's usually what we do. And so that's really where I started off my first month with the Expos, and then starting off 2004 with them, I was sharing the setup roles with Luis Ayala. And that was and that was cool. I learned a lot from him. He was a very good setup man. I think he closed a couple games when Rocky Biddle wasn't available. But I learned a lot from both both Luis and even Rocky too. And it was awesome, you know, being able to be up there, be in the big leagues, play in Montreal. It was a lot of fun, and having the support of Frank Robinson meant the world to me. Like, yes, no, I didn't have a chance to watch Frank when he was playing, but my dad is a huge baseball fan, loves the history of it, the minute he found out who I was drafted by the Expos, he knew who Frank was, and he gave me a huge rundown of his career and the type of player he was. So to be able to play for him, have his confidence, and knowing that he had my back, even when I faltered sometimes, which happened quite a bit that first year, it meant the world to me. So to be able to play for Frank, be a setup man, and then earn his trust to be the closer was, I mean, it's something that I'll always cherish.
So in that last season in Montreal, 2004, I guess there was a lot of rumors swirling about the future of the team, and at some point, the decision was made and announced, the transition to Washington. Did that affect you as a player at all? Did that make things any more difficult for you as a player?
Not necessarily for me. Like I was still a 22-year-old kid in the big leagues. You know, I was playing the Cardinal Series a year before, so I was still enjoying my time up there. I wasn't really too concerned about what was going on, because I mean, it was out of my control anyways. The only thing that really was tough was the travel, having to play down in Puerto Rico for those 22 games. I remember that first month of the season in 2004, we had 3 home games in Montreal. That was it. You know, we had a 10-day homestand in Puerto Rico. So I think our first month went like this. I believe we started, I can't remember exactly where we started off, but it was something like Atlanta to Florida, Philadelphia down to Puerto Rico to Montreal for 3 games, and then back out to San Diego, LA, and then back up home. So we were on the road for, I think, 27 of those first 30 games. And that was a tough part, because at that time, in order for us to be able to go down and play those games in Puerto Rico, we had to come up with a rule to where our first 22 games could only happen, or in Puerto Rico. I'm sorry. Yeah, our first 22 games in Puerto Rico could only happen in the first half of the season. So the travel during that first half of the season wasn't ideal, but at the same time, it was still fun. You know, we're still in the big leagues. We still had a job to do, and at the same time, it was an exciting time because we were trying to figure out where we were going to be. But that travel down to Puerto Rico, that was the toughest part of that whole season.
Okay, so we transitioned to 2005. You guys moved to Washington. Speaking personally, as a former Washington Senators fan that lived without a team for 34 years, 2005 was a magical season. And you all hit it out of the park for the first couple months. You were one of the best teams in baseball. What was that experience like?
That was fun. You know, it was an exciting time. We had a chance to bring baseball back to DC. And like you said, 34 years of not having a team that's a long time for a city to go without having baseball live, and without having to drive to Baltimore to go see the Orioles. So it was fun. You know, it was exciting. I think for the most part we sold out the majority of the games. I think that first year. I think there was some downtimes and stuff where we didn't sell out, but you could tell the fans were excited. I mean, I remember the first time watching the fans jump up and down and thinking that RFK Stadium was gonna collapse on itself. You know, me being from California and being used to earthquakes, that's what it felt like. It felt like another earthquake for me. So I was a little nervous at the time, but then I think one of the security guards down the bullpen was with us, was reassuring, like, hey, everything's good. This is what they did when the Redskins were playing here. So, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the stadium was well known for rocking, literally. So we're heading into the All-Star break, and you're tearing it up, and you're named one of the 2 All-Stars from the Washington Nationals, along with Livan Hernandez. So you got into that All-Star game. Tell us something about your All-Star experience.
It was that's something I'll never forget. I remember when I found out, we were in Chicago playing the Cubs. I think it was July 4th. I think it was, or July 4th or 5th. I can't remember the exact day, but it was a Sunday, and we had a team meeting in the clubhouse before the game, and Frank had brought everybody together and he announced it, and I was like what? Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I knew I was having a good year, but making the All-Star team was a far first from my thought that I had at the time. So when he said I had made it, I was like kind of like shocked, and I'm pretty sure my jaw probably dropped a little bit. But and everybody said, "Hey, go grab your phone, go call your parents." So I remember grabbing my phone, going around the corner into the laundry room and calling my parents and telling them. And I think my mom was crying, my dad was crying. I think I might have been crying a little bit, but you know, it was fun to find out, and to be told by Frank it meant the world to me. And then playing the All-Star game is something that I'll never forget. I remember when I got the call down the bullpen asking if I want to throw, because I think the NL we were down, I think it was 7-4 at the time, and it was in the eighth inning. And Tony La Russa had called down the bullpen, and he's like, "Hey, if because I think PB was the one throwing, he's like, if PB doesn't get out of his inning, do you want to get the last out?" I was like, "Heck yeah, I do," because in the back of my head, I knew like I couldn't take this opportunity for granted, because who knows even though I was only 23 at the time, I knew it was like there's a chance I might never come back, and sure enough, I didn't end up making another All-Star team. So I wanted to take that opportunity to throw it, because I didn't know if I was going to be back that next year. So I told him, heck yeah. So he said, "Yep, if as long as there's no double play right here, you got the last out." So I got ready real quick, and luckily PB didn't roll up a double play, and so I went in and threw. And I remember as I was leaving the bullpen running on the mound, I almost tripped coming out of the bullpen, because I always ran out of the bullpen with my head down. And then where the bullpen is in Detroit, it's at right center a little bit, but it's more angled towards center field. So when I came out of the door, I was running towards like first base. And when I finally lifted my head up, I realized I was going towards first base and not the mound. So I had to make a quick change, and my clumsy self almost tripped in center field trying to make that change. So that's something I'll never forget as well. But at the same time, having a chance to pitch in the All-Star game and then striking out Ivan Rodriguez, that was pretty cool.
Fantastic. Let me we're getting a lot of questions in the chat, so let me get a couple of those. One question is wondering, did you have a star player that you could get out easily? And so who was your player you like to face the most, and who was the player you least like to face?
Well, the answer to both those questions are pretty easy for me. Griffey was the one I got out every time. I don't know what it was about the way I threw, but he could not pick up anything. I think I faced him 5 times and struck him out 4 times. His fifth and final at bat, he faced off of me. He tried to bunt, and he bunted right back to me. And I remember him running down the line, and I don't know, he was saying something, but kind of like laughing and joking like he always did. And at that felt pretty cool. But yeah, I had a lot of success against Griffey. And then there were actually 2 guys that I couldn't stand facing, because no matter what I threw to them, it either ended up off the top of the fence or over the fence. And that was Chipper and Andrew Jones. And unfortunately, I had to face them back to back with the Braves, and had to face them all the time. And wouldn't you know it, no matter what the situation was, I just happened to always face them every time we face the Braves. So they gave me nightmares. To this day, I still have a hard time like thinking about that when people ask me. But you know what, I did it, and those are 2 of the best players to play in that era. So, and they owned a lot of people, and I was just one of them.
So Chipper's already in the Hall of Fame, and it looks like Andrew Jones could be on the path. Do you believe that he's a Hall of Fame player? I
think so. If in his prime, when he was with the Braves, he was the best defensive center fielder, in the game. Anything that went his way, he was going to catch, and he was clutch too. I mean, for him to come up when he was 19 years old and be thrust in the spotlight in the World Series, like that's pretty tough to do. And he maintained it for a very long time. And for me personally, I think he's a Hall of Famer, and I hope he gets in. I think he will. But every time, I loved watching him, no matter how much success he had off me hitting. I loved sitting in the bullpen and watching him play. I mean, he was a fantastic player to watch.
Okay. Question here asks, what makes a closer so much different than other relief pitchers? Is it really a mental thing? And I guess the question to you is, do you think there's much of a difference between relieving and starting?
For a closer, you gotta have a lot. It's a lot different mentality, because yes, you still have to get 3 outs no matter what inning you come in. However, those last three outs are some of the most important outs of the game. And a lot of times you are facing the heart of that lineup. If you come in the 7th or 8th, a lot of times you're facing, 7, 8, 9 hole hitters, maybe 9, 1, 2 or whatever. But for whatever reason, when you come in the 9th inning, especially in a close game, you're always facing that heart of the lineup. And so you're facing their power guys who can tie it up with one swing of the bat. So you have to have a little bit different mentality. A lot of guys, what they do is they put a lot more pressure on themselves when they throw the 9th inning for whatever reason. And for me personally, it's just I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that pressure. I know I made it a little bit interesting sometimes, but I enjoyed that. It was a lot more fun for me to throw in the 9th inning than it was in the 7th or 8th. I don't know why. I think I just kind of enjoyed having that pressure put on me and knowing that, I'm the last person they have to get through for the other team to win or come back. But I enjoyed it. But a lot of guys, they for whatever reason, they can't handle it. And relieving and starting it's different. Starting, you're going to throw it once every 5 days. The relievers, you have to do everything you can to make sure that you're available every single day. I remember, I think it was 2005. It was June of 2005. I had thrown in in a span of 11 of 13 games. And that was tough. Luckily a lot of the times were those last couple of games that I threw, I think I only threw maybe 10 pitches at the most, but it's different. You have to be ready. Really, like I said, you have to be ready to go every day, no matter how your arm is feeling. You might be lucky to have a day off. But starters, they know they're going to go their 5 or 6 innings, and then they're going to have 4 days off to in between outings. For us, we have to be ready every day. If we have a terrible outing the night before, we have to figure out a way to forget it and then come back and be available for the next day.
So after 2005, you had good seasons with the Nationals again in 2006, 2007. 2007, you had 37 saves. And then we run into 2008 and you encounter injuries. Tell us some about that.
Yeah, that was tough. That was the first time I'd ever been hurt. And so when I first felt it, I remember it was the first home game again in the new stadium against the Braves. We were taking batting practice, and all the pitchers were down the right field line playing catch. And I remember I felt a sharp pain go from my shoulder down to my elbow, and I didn't know what it was. So I went in and talked to the training staff, let them know what was going on, and they checked me out. They had initially diagnosed me with tendonitis, so they shut me down. And then I had a couple of MRIs. The MRIs did show that I had a tear in my labrum, but we treated it as an MRI because, from what I was told, every pitcher, if you go in there and look at something, they're going to find some kind of tear. So that's what I was going off of, and unfortunately it was a lot worse than what we had initially thought. When I went in for surgery finally in July of that year, the doctor had found a torn labrum, a torn lat, and a torn bicep and fraying of the labrum. So I had four really major issues going on with my shoulder. And fortunately, that's really what ended my career. Yeah, I came back with the Mariners a couple years later, but I wasn't the same. I wasn't throwing as hard as I could. My control wasn't where it needed to be. And unfortunately, that's what my career ended because of injury. But at the same time, I wouldn't change anything. I had a chance to play in the big leagues for just under 6 years. I made it up my month and a half after being drafted and made an all-star team and played for Team USA. So in a short time, I had a really good career, and I wouldn't change anything for it. It was unfortunate the way it ended, but that's the way it is a lot of times in baseball, especially for relievers and pitchers. But like I said, I wouldn't change anything. I'm still very grateful for the time I had with Major League Baseball.
One of the questions here is wondering about your time with the Indy team in St. Paul. How was that?
That was fun. And to be honest, I was only there for 2 weeks, but it was probably some of the funnest times I had with baseball. Honestly, I had a couple former teammates of mine from Cal State Fullerton were on that same team, and they helped me out. And and one of them had played in the bigs with the Royals, and he's like, I've never had so much fun in my entire life. And I got there. Yes, I was only there for 2 weeks, but it was awesome. The field wasn't what I was used to. Heck no, it was like a high school field, but at the same time, it was fun. It was just playing baseball for the love of the game, and I love playing baseball. I love the game, and that's really, it brought me back to my childhood.
All right. You talked earlier about coming to RFK and maybe that being a special experience because of how old it was. What were your impressions of RFK as compared to some other stadiums you played in?
RFK was unique. Let's put it that way. It was unique, but it was unique in a good way. Like no other stadium had fans or had seats that bounced up and down when the crowds got going. But so that's what I loved about RFK. I didn't love the cold showers we had to take after games. That was not very fun. But I loved everything else about RFK. But my favorite stadium, probably for me, and it's probably because I'm biased, is San Diego. Being one of the newer ones, it's right there by the beach. It's a beautiful ballpark. It's very pitcher friendly too because of the fog that rolls in from the water and stuff. But it's every stadium has its own unique thing part about it. Philadelphia, as much as I hated going to Philadelphia because of their fans, it was great. It was a beautiful ballpark. The view we had from the bullpen was second to none. It was probably one of the best ones we've had. We were up top and we got to see everything. San Francisco being right there on the bay was awesome. Very cold but great. Seattle, same thing. What I loved about Seattle was, yes, it's a dome stadium, but the sides are still open. Like the sides aren't closed, so you're still getting the outside air. So you can still have the dome closed, but you're still kind of getting that mist that's coming out from the outside air. It's great. So every stadium is unique and has its own special part about it. And that's what RFK was. RFK, yes, it was old. It was an old, generic cookie cutter type of ballpark, but it had its own ambiance to it. You could, like I said, the way the seats bounced up and down, or the way the seats actually moved to center field when we left and we saw the tracks coming on the outfield fence when they moved and when we left, so that DC United could play there. I loved it. It was great. It was our home, and and that's what I loved about it. It was the first park I got to play in DC. So no matter how old it was, no matter how many faults it had, I still love that place. And it still holds a huge part in my heart, no matter what, because that's where I had all those good years with the Nationals. I didn't really have a chance to play in the new stadium. So RFK that's my home when I think of Washington.
All right, you helped close out the RFK Stadium by striking out Jason Worth in that last final game in September. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that was cool because I think they considered that the second park I think got closed down because I was the last pitcher to also throw a pitch in Montreal too. So be able to close down RFK, with all the history, that was pretty cool. And to end it on a strikeout like that with a win against the Phillies, that was pretty special too.
Okay. Question about the role of the relief pitcher. Can you speak to the idea that the best relief pitcher ought to pitch in the most important out of the game, whenever it is, versus the end of the game? What's your thought on that?
I kind of agree with that, because a lot of times those last three outs aren't necessarily going to be the most important outs. A lot of times the most important out it might happen in the 6th or 7th inning, where it's a huge situation. So say you have the four-hole hitter coming up and you have bases loaded with 2 outs and you're up by 2 or 3 runs, you want to make sure you have your best guy facing that best hitter at that time. Because if you wait too long, and you keep somebody in there that might not have as much success against that hitter as somebody else, and you might be you're opening yourself up to possibly giving up that go ahead run or something. But I kind of agree to that. That's I've heard that before and I thought about it a little bit, but yeah, I like that idea of having your best pitcher come in a more important spot, whether it's 6th, 7th, 8th or 9th or whatever the situation is. because you never want to hold on to your best reliever, your best option too long.
Right. What about the trend that we've seen embraced by some teams where they have the relievers starting the games and, for an inning or two, and so that the real starter then can go a little bit later into the game? What about that strategy?
That's interesting to me. I'm still trying to get used to it. However, I do think it works for some pitchers because a lot of times there's a lot of pitchers, they, for whatever reason, they struggle in that first or second inning so it might take them a little bit longer to get ready. And I've seen that when I was coaching high school, when I've been coaching with professional and even college ball. There's a lot of guys that, for whatever reason, that first inning always gives them fits as a starter. So if they have a chance to come in the second or third inning and have a reliever start, a lot of times that's going to work out better for them. But it's different for everybody. And like I said, it's something I'm still getting used to. I like the starter starting, but at the same time, it does work for some starters to come in the second or third inning, because some guys just need more time to warm up.
All right. While we've been talking, someone went to Retrosheet and confirmed your recollection that Griffey didn't do well against you. They say that he was 0 for 5 and had 3 Ks against you. So that's pretty amazing record against one of the greatest hitters of all time.
Yeah, it kind of surprised me. I remember the first time I faced him was in Montreal, and I think I struck him out on a 3-2 changeup, and I never threw changeup. So I think that's what caught me off guard the most. And then after that, I started just throwing him nothing but changeups. But I never thought I would have success against a guy like that, honestly. And then once I did, it kind of just gave me more confidence that I can throw against other hitters too. But I remember when I ended up playing with Griffey and with Team USA and spring training with the Mariners before he retired, he remembered that I got him out every time, and he would give me a hard time about it every time I saw him in the morning when he was eating his waffles before spring training and stuff. So that was cool, and that was cool to be kind of made fun of by him. And but at the same time, I felt that I was pretty cool for getting him out 5 times.
You mentioned working with Frank Robinson. Besides Frank, who else, which coach or managers were important to your career?
Professionally, I mean, Frank Robinson stood out the most. Our bullpen coach, Bobby Nadel, when we were in Montreal and then our first year in DC, he had a huge part of allowing me to be the pitcher that I was. I even named my son after his son, Cooper. But so he helped me out a lot. But to be honest, like the most important coaches I've had in my career, aside from Frank, were my college coaches at Fullerton. George Horton, Rick Vanderhook, and Dave Serrano. They played a huge role. In fact, I'm gonna go see them all later today. We have our alumni game today at Fullerton, and they're all going to be there. So I'm gonna go hang out with them and talk to them a little bit. But they had a huge role in me being who I was and me being the type of pitcher that I was. They gave me a lot of confidence. I wasn't a very big recruit coming out of high school, and I think I might have been their last recruit that they had. But they made me their closer my freshman year, which was pretty cool. And another thing I didn't really think was going to happen, but they gave me a lot of confidence. They're the ones who really taught me how to pitch and how to pitch my fastball, and they're the ones who really got me to learn that control is more important than velocity, because I didn't throw as hard as some other guys. So I had to rely on control, and they really allowed me to really learn how to harness all that.
So besides the coaches, what players, did you work with, or, who was a mentor to you that maybe gave you the best advice for your career?
Honestly, working with Brian Snyder helped me a lot. He wasn't the most heralded catcher in the world, but him and I worked very well together. He gave me a lot of confidence. He knew exactly what to tell me when I was struggling. If I couldn't find my release point, he knew exactly what to do. And a lot of times it was just joking around with me. But he helped me a lot. And so did Jamie Carroll. Jamie Carroll, when I first got called up, took me under his wing. I played with his younger his younger brother Wes and A-Ball with the Expos, and he's the one who kind of molded me into the player that I was and the kid that I was. He had been around for a while, and he was older guy, but he invited me to live with him in Montreal when I was up there, and he's the one who kind of took me under his wing and helped me get settled in. I mean, and he was a great guy, and there's a reason why he played as long as he did. You know, Jamie wasn't the type of player who was going to play every day. He didn't have a one set position, but he was the type of guy, if you wanted him to go catch, play first base, second base, he was going to go out there and do that. And I love that. And so I'm very grateful for both Jamie and for Brian.
Are there any of your former colleagues you still stay in touch with?
I talk to Joel Hanrahan every now and then. Dimitri Young from time to time. Those are the main two that I keep in touch with. Joel and I share the same agent, and then Dimitri lives out here in California as well. So we touch base every now and then. He's a high school coach about an hour north from where I live now. I think he went back to coach where he went to high school. So, and from what I know, he's doing pretty well. But yeah, those are the main two guys.
Okay, checking your biography, I saw that after you retired, you were a bullpen coach and a pitching coach in the minors, and also went back to, I think, Cal State Fullerton and coached there. Right. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So after I retired, I went back and coached at Cal State Fullerton. Went to the school for 2 more years. Still was like, I think I still need like another semester left before I graduate, but did that, and that was fun. You know, I wanted to go back and get back to Fullerton because for all the stuff that for all the way they helped me out. So I went back and coached for them for 2 years. And then after my time was done at Fullerton, I got a job with the Reds and coached in Billings for their short season team. And then was the pitching coach for Greenville, which was, I think it was a short season team as well. But it was fun, you know. the professional side of coaching is a little bit tough for me. You know, seeing all, you know, what goes on behind closed doors was an eye opener for me and stuff. But I enjoyed it. You know, I enjoyed my time working with younger kids. It was tough also because I have young kids, and where I was out in Greenville, Tennessee, was very hard to fly them into. I think the nearest airport was maybe 2 hours away in Knoxville, I think. So it was very expensive and very tough to fly them out there. So that was really the main reason why I stopped coaching professionally, was I want to be close to my kids. I am divorced. However, my ex-wife and I, we do get along very well. She lives about 45 minutes away from here, so it allows me to see my kids whenever I want. I can see them. I don't coach them because I choose not to, but I can go to all their school plays now, and, you know, watch my daughter play softball, watch my son play baseball or do violin or whatever they're doing. So, and when I was coaching professionally, I missed too much of their events. So that's really the reason I stepped away from coaching professionally. But, you know, I enjoyed my time. It was fun. Seeing the inner workings of things, what goes on behind closed doors. It's different, like I said, but it was a good learning experience, and it's something that I use now when I'm coaching high school.
Yeah, I was going to segue to what you're doing now. It sounds like coaching is still part of your life.
Yep. I can't get away from the game. I'm coaching softball now, so it's a little bit different, but I like it a lot more than I did coaching younger kids baseball. They get after it a little more, and also too, like, it reminds me of old school baseball. I like the hit and runs. I like the bunting and all that kind of stuff. I don't like having to wait for a 3-run home run that may never come. I like the small ball aspect of baseball, and that's what softball brings. It's a very fast-paced game, lots of skill work, and that's really what I love to do. So right now I'm coaching high school softball, and I also run my own travel softball team as well.
Okay, and those, I think when we talked before, you're coaching young women in softball. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. High school. Yeah. So I have an 18U team. I like it too because I helped with the recruiting. So I'm the one who's calling up schools, talking to them, trying to sell them to schools, and helping them kind of understand like what they need to do to get into a school. Recently we have a girl who plays out here in California. She's from Hawaii. We just helped her out and got her in touch with the University of Hawaii, and she ended up getting a scholarship to go play for UH. So that's what I like to do. I like helping kids get to the level that I was. Obviously, softball is a little bit different. They can't get to Major League Baseball, but I still want to help them get to, the highest level that they can get to, whatever that may be.
Okay. So as you when you were with the Nationals, we saw Ryan Zimmerman start his career. What was it like to watch that career unfold and develop?
You can see, like, when he first got called up, remember he was a shortstop, this skinny kid shortstop. But you can see it, like he had the tools to be a great player. Did I imagine him being with the Nationals his entire career? No, but I'm very glad that he did. Because that's very rare now. Guys don't do that anymore. And for them to be from that, from the Virginia area, born or go to Virginia and be drafted by the Nationals and have a chance to play in front of it, in front of his friends and family, that's a huge thing. But I remember when he first got called up, like I said, like you could see it. Like if he just put on some muscle, that guy he was going to take off, and he can see his glove work. His glove work was probably some of the best I've seen in the game when I was playing. And so when they moved him over to third base, I was excited. He's a great kid when he got called up. Very quiet, very humble. Didn't really talk a whole lot, but you can tell that the kid, he wanted to get better and he wanted to learn. And sure enough, I mean, he did, and he did a lot of really good things for Zim, and I couldn't be prouder of the kid.
Are you still a fan of Major League Baseball? Are you still watching these days? And who do you like?
I don't watch it as much anymore. I keep track of it. I just don't have time to sit down and watch games because of all the coaching I do. I think I maybe average an hour or two at home every day before I go to sleep. So a lot of times it's either hanging out with my fiance or my kids if they're over, or going over practice plans and stuff like that. So I don't have a whole lot of time to watch, but I do keep track of it. I try to keep up track with my phone. I get all the alerts still. I am still a big fan of the Nationals in a huge way. Like they're my favorite team still on the MLB.com app and stuff. But I enjoy baseball as a whole. Some of it is getting a little hard to watch sometimes, but with all the new rules and something I have to get used to. But I'm still a huge fan of baseball.
Let's get back to coaching women's softball. One of the questions was, what are your thoughts about not women's softball, but women's baseball?
That's funny you ask it, because my brother, he's always talking about how he wants to start up a travel women's baseball team out here. Because there's a lot of girls, especially the girls that we get from Hawaii. Sorry, they all grew up playing baseball. My fiance played baseball when she was growing up. That's her behind me right now. She didn't play softball until her senior year in high school. She was playing baseball all the way up through her junior year in high school. So I love the fact that women want to play baseball. I am all for it. I love watching the game, and a lot of time, and when I saw that young girl down in Australia pitching, that I got excited about that. She's good, and hopefully, they get a chance to play at a high level. I would love to see it. I wish more people would be open to them playing the sport as I am, but I hope to see a lot more playing, and shoot, if they're better than guys, I mean, give them a chance. I'm all for it. Women in baseball, I think is a very good thing.
What do you think might help facilitate the proliferation of women's baseball?
I think if the coach succeeds down with the Yankees, I think that's going to help out a lot. I am hoping for the best for her. I think she's from what I've heard from friends who've coached with her, she's a real deal. And so I think if she could be successful this year and earn the respect of the players, which I think she will, that's going to go a huge way to helping even more women get into the game. But it's just, so I think for younger kids, it's just they're going to use her as a role model, and to look and to have a woman to look up to. And so I think she's going to help the game out a lot, and even, I forget who. I think there was another woman who just got hired on by the Red Sox, I think, too. So if they can succeed, I think that's going to go a long way into helping more women get into the game.
What are your thoughts on the current MLB lockout?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not really a fan of it. I get both sides. I haven't really been paying too much attention to it. But you know, I want the game to come back. You know, I don't like seeing work stoppages. You know, for me, just, you know, come to agreement. Like I get their stuff that they have to go over and make sure that you know, everybody's getting a fair deal or whatever it is. But you know, I think the game needs to come back. You know, it only hurts the game when, you know, when work stop like this, and if games are going to be missed because they can't come to agreement, that's going to be tough. You know, it might take a little bit of time for fans to really, you know, want to come back and watch the sport. You know, I think diehard fans will be there, but even them, you know, some of the new rules too, it's a little tough to hear sometimes.
Okay, good. Just checking things out, seeing if there's any more questions. Do you have any last minute things you want to tell us about?
Not the top of my head, but no, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You know, like I said earlier, any time I have a chance to speak with fans or be part of a, you know, baseball history group like this, you know, it's a huge opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful for it. So thank you very much.
It's been our pleasure. A great guest. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to turn it back to Mark, and he's going to take us to our next guest.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chad. And we've blown past last year's attendance. We've topped out so far at 127, 128 people this morning. So anyway, to get to our next speaker, all you think you've got to know about our cleanup hitter, Frank Howard, is his 382 career homers. But he led the American League twice in round trippers with 44 each in 1968 and 1970, but his career high was 48 in 1969. Frank led the American League in total bases in 1968 and 69, and in 1970 led the league not only in four-baggers, but in RBIs and walks as well. But there's probably a story behind every home run Frank lauded. And here's one from the 2017 book, Incredible Baseball Stories, edited by Ken Samuelson, a multiple winner in SABR convention baseball trivia contests. It's told by Billy Booth, a pitcher a bit lower than Frank was in the Dodgers minor league system. March 1958, Vero Beach, Florida, Dodger Town, the home of the now Los Angeles Dodgers spring training facility. I was a minor league pitcher under contract to the Dodgers, and on this particular morning, I was on my way to a backfield to join my teammates assigned to the Green Bay, Wisconsin Dodgers. The local papers were full of stories about the Dodgers signing of Frank Hondo Howard, a 6'8", 260-pound All-American out of Ohio State. Our manager was Pete Reiser, and we were about to play an intra-organization practice game. I saw a lot of Big Frank in those next few days. Big time power, to say the least. He would loosen up with 3 bats and a groundskeeper shovel. The next morning, I found out we would be playing a night game against the Montreal Royals at Holman Stadium, and I was scheduled to pitch. Obviously, the brass wanted to show off their new player Hondo in front of a big crowd, the media, and everyone in the organization. Okay, Frank comes up to bat in the second inning, and I struck him out swinging with a change curve. In the 5th, I had a 1-0 lead, and here comes Hondo again. We go 3-1, and catcher Doug Camilli, son of Dolph, calls for the curve again. I'm thinking that's what Frank is thinking, and shook off the curve in favor of high heat. The last time I saw that ball, it was disappearing over the moon somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. It's now 1-1, and I know this is my last inning, so I waited for things to quiet down. The voice from the Montreal dugout was loud and clear. "Don't worry, kid, we'll look for it later." It was pitcher Tommy Lasorda. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a real treasure to our game, the one and the only Frank Howard. Where are you, Frank? I see. Okay, great. Frank.
I think Frank is muted.
Hit stop #6 to unmute yourself, Frank.
*6.
*6. I've got an emergency phone number just for situations like this. Sit tight, gang.
How's this? A little better? Still not on.
I hope you heard that story, Frank. You're loud and clear.
All right, are we okay now?
We are okay.
All right, what's up?
Well, how you feeling today?
Listen, I feel good at this stage in the game. I'm doing all right. I'm doing fine, really. And it's like like Tommy McGraw, my old teammate, used to say, Frank, we're in the 8th or 9th inning. I said, yeah, we got a 1-run lead. I hope they tie it up and we play 25 innings. In other words, I hope to live to be 120. Okay, well, let's talk baseball.
Now, I've got some starter questions for Mr. Howard, but if you have some of your own, please put them in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. Now, Frank, I'll get the obvious one. You hit 382 home runs in the major leagues. Which ones do you remember most fondly?
Well, you know, I've never given a lot of thought to that, but I think probably the home run I hit in the All-Star game here in Washington, probably the home run I hit in the 4th game of the World Series in Los Angeles. Those two probably stand out in my mind. They're not stand out, but I remember them probably more than any other home run. You know, you'll get more recognition and respect from playing on a world championship ball club than you'll ever get for any individual things you do. And to be a member of a world championship ball club, you know, it's I think you'll get more acclaim and more applause from that than anything else.
You know, the baseball world has not seen someone as physically imposing as you compared to everyone else in a uniform on the field during your tenure in the majors. And the closest I can think of today is Aaron Judge of the Yankees. Do you see anything like yourself in Aaron Judge?
Well, I've never seen, and then the other big guy they got there out of Miami, the Florida Marlins.
Yes.
Well, I've never seen either one of them play, but the reports I've gotten from people that have seen them play say the sky is the limit. You got guys 6'5", 6'6", 230 pounds that can run like a deer, can throw, can field, and hit with power. I'm going to tell you, they never haven't seen them. I've heard nothing but glowing scouting reports on
them. For the past several years, Major League Baseball has employed its own data devices, which it calls StatCast. It can, for example, tell not only the distance of a home run, but how fast it traveled off the bat and the launch angle of the ball.
Oh,
after
well, I
impact.
tell you, I tell you, there's so much intel in not only in baseball but in all sports today, and I think I really do. I believe you're foolish if you don't utilize it.
Mhm.
But you can take out of any analytics, you can take 4 or 5 key points, use them to your advantage, and take the game even a further step than where it's been.
How much of that interested you in your playing days, or maybe you used
Well, we
different
never
words to
thought
define this
about
stuff?
it. I mean, the world we live in today is so much more advanced than what it was when we played. Like I said, these young people today, if the truth were being known, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger.
Mm.
They have access to better equipment, better coaching, better diets. Today's young athlete is I mean, for the most part, is a very intelligent young guy. He knows he's got a chance to do in 5 or 10 years what it takes most working men 50 years of their lives to achieve. You know, the salary structure is there, and they're going to take advantage of it. God bless them. I admire their tenacity, if that's the word I'm looking for.
You know, someday, Frank, the District of Columbia is going to make good on its threat to tear down RFK Stadium. Are there any particular seats you'd like dibs on?
Oh, no. There are 12,000 seats in the upper deck in RFK, and 20 of them are painted white. And the other 11,990 times I walk back to the dugout with a bat stuck up my backside. No, I look at these young people today, not only in baseball, but in football, NBA, National Hockey League, and I mean, they're doing so many amazing. They're so advanced, and doing so amazing things that when I watch, I watch in awe at some of the things. To see what these athletes are doing today, running the 7 foot tall, running the full court back and forth, and hitting 3-pointers. The ice skaters, you see let's say a transition. I grew up in hockey with the Bobby Halls, Gordie Howells, John Beliveau. I see that transformation to the Bobby Orrs, then to the Wayne Gretzky's, and now to these 2 young skaters, the one here in Washington, the Russian skater, and then the guy in Pittsburgh, Crosby. I mean, they're doing so many amazing things that and they do. They, like I said, they can do in 5 or 10 years from a financial standpoint what has taken most of us people 50 years of our lives to accomplish. No, my hat's off. Hello.
No, I'm here. That's good. No, we had somebody from the meeting say in the chat function of the Zoom that when my dad used to take me to RFK Stadium, he would always point out the contrast painted seats in the upper deck where Frank hit his monster home runs. And now I'm going to start asking some questions that people are still posting. There are 7 that I haven't even been able to read yet, listening to your latest.
You go right ahead.
No problem. Well, somebody points out that Joe Poznansky, an astute baseball writer, says that you are tied with Ryan Howard for the most home runs, 382, for somebody whose name ends in the letter D. Go figure. Okay, and for somebody named Howard, for that matter. here we go. Kyle Schwarber's historic home run hitting in June reminded many in Washington of your streak in 1968. What did locked in, quote unquote, mean to you in 68?
Well, I think there's probably, your swing is probably flawless. You're probably reading your opposing pitchers pretty good, and they called me on this young man, and I knew he grew up in the Cub organization. I'd never had seen him play, but he was at a stage. I think he's 28 years old. Most hitters, I mean, not that you waste those early years, but most hitters don't really become a professional hitter until they hit their prime years of between 28 and 33, 34. So, there are exceptions to every rule. You get some guys come into the league and there's actually no mystery. Plus, they have great game preparation, and they've got a stroke that works for them.
Yeah. We have an inquiring mind who asks, did you ever get a chance to play with Roy Sievers, maybe in 1965 with the Senators?
Well, he was with us for a brief period in '65. He was at the tail end of his career. You know what? Most left-hand hitters have all picturesque type swings. The Ted Williams, the Barry Bonds, the Willie McCoveys, the Willie Sergio. Most left-hand, but the right-hand hitters, for whatever reason, haven't had that picturesque, mechanically perfect swing. The three right-hand hitters that I have seen over the years that I thought from the right side of the plate had great strokes. Roy Sievers is one of them. Mark McGuire is another one. And Dick Stewart from the Pittsburgh Pirates had great mechanical swings from the right side. Almost flawless.
What do you remember about Sandy Koufax, a teammate in LA?
If you want to combine, now I didn't see Bob Feller. I'm sure he's way before me. He would probably be in this group with these guys. But if you want to combine sheer velocity with a great curveball, not a good one, you either name Sandy Koufax or Nolan Ryan. Now, there's been great curveball pitchers, Bert Blylevel, Camilo Pascual, Sad Sam Jones, Ernie Broglio, great curveball pitchers, but didn't have that velocity. There have been guys that probably threw as hard, Turk Farrell, Don McMahon, Bob Gibson, Juan Morichal as a young pitcher, that had that velocity, but didn't have that great curveball. But the four guys that come to my mind that combined four above average major league pitches, fastball, curveball, slider, changeup. Three of them were left-handed. Steve Carlton, young Frank Tanana before he hurt his arm, Sudden Sam McDowell, and then the other guy would be Juan Morichal as a young pitcher. Had four pitches above major league average, well above it.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
So, it's, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you about another Moundsman who was a teammate of yours, but in Washington, Dick Bosman.
Professional pitcher, sinker ball, two-seam sinker ball, slider ball pitcher, absolute command of both pitches, absolute, and a very astute guy, very sharp cookie. but when I say he knows how to set each individual hitter, start him off, set him up, and close him. And Dick's been a very dear friend of mine over the years. But I'll tell you something. Well, he was a major league pitching coach for 10, 12, 15 years. And he headed minor league pitching programs for organizations for another 25 years. You don't survive in baseball that long unless you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question. This is going back to your Ohio State days. Who got the Hondo nickname first, you or John Havlicek?
Well, I think John probably got it first. I got it from my old roommate in L.A., Chuck Ejections. My only guy, he and Jackie Jensen's the only two guys ever playing a Rose Bowl and playing the big leagues. And but Chuck gave it to me, and I tell you what, John Havel, I signed in the spring of '58. I missed my last quarter of school, and we didn't sign. We drafted him, if that's the word I'm looking for. The Jerry Lucases, the John Havliceks, the Larry Siegfrieds, so they went on to have national championship basketball teams.
Well, you were an All-American in basketball and baseball at Ohio State. What made you choose one over the other? Among your contemporaries, Ron Reed chose baseball over basketball. Dave DeBuscher chose basketball over baseball. Would you have wanted to try and play two sports if you thought you could get away with it?
No, if I think back on it, I think had I tried to play two sports, I wouldn't have made it in either one. I'd have made it, but I wouldn't have been a player. I was probably more noted as a basketball player in those days than a baseball player, but I loved the game of baseball, and I didn't know how far I was going to go, but I had an opportunity to sign and took that opportunity and parlayed it into a big league career.
Frank, can you talk more about the '63 series? Somebody must be calling from LA, because it was a big deal for us in Los Angeles that the Dodgers beat the Yankees, swept them in 4.
Well, that was a great Yankee ball club. I want you to think about this. You got Elson Howard behind the plate. Yogi Berra was just finishing up as a player, later to become a coach and a manager, a successful coach and a manager at the big league level. You had Joe Pepitone at first base. You had Bobby Richardson at second base. Could do everything with a bat but make it sing. You had Tony Kubek at shortstop. And you had Cletus Boyer at third base. You had Tommy Tresh in left field, Mickey Mantle in center field, and Roger Maris in right. And you had that great contact hitter, Hector Lopez, on the bench. So you're talking about a great Yankee ball club. If that World Series were played 10 times, who knows who would win 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, or who knows? But you run across in a short series, you run across Sandy Koufax, Johnny Padres, Don Drysdale, and Sandy Koufax. And Koufax and Ford are hooked up 1-1 late in the game, in that fourth game. If Pepitone doesn't lose that ball coming from third base out of the white shirts, those two guys are probably still pitching out there. In other words, it was just, Ford only gave us 2 hits in that fourth game.
Now, you were part of the massive trade between the Dodgers and the Senators prior to the 65 season. What was it? How did it feel being traded from the only professional home you ever knew?
Well, I tell you what, I want you to think about it. The best personnel that we had team-wise in LA was 1962. The Giants beat us in a playoff. But we don't want to make any excuses. Had we had Koufax the whole year, we didn't have him the last half of the season. Had we had him the whole year, I don't think there would have been a playoff. But there was, and they beat us. But I want you to think about just the outfield. Wally Moon, bona fide big league, major league player. Duke Snyder, Hall of Famer. Willie Davis, Tommy Davis, Ron Fairley, 2,000 major league hits, 18-year career in the big league, and Frank Howard with Lee Walls. Lee Walls in there. So that's 7 outfielders vying for 3 spots. 7 outfielders vying for 3 spots. I was probably a 3rd, 4th outfielder in that ball club. And I hit 32 home runs, drove in 119 runs, and couldn't make the first team. That's the kind of talent we have. But coming to Washington, it gave me an opportunity to play every day, add another 150 at-bats to my yearly total. As a result, I had my best years here.
Mm. Can you talk about the first time you met Ted Williams? And you can talk about his influence on you at the plate.
Let me tell you something. Ted Williams is the most electric, or was the most electric, charismatic individual I've ever met in my life. A true, not only a baseball icon, but an American icon. When you consider, I want you to think about this. When you consider this man gave 5.5 prime playing years to the United States Naval Marines, World War II, and the Korean War, who knows what he'd have done? And hitting in a big ballpark in right field in Fenway Park. Big field. When you consider I'm telling you something, the king of swing, letter perfect, great eyesight. You know, if you really look at these guys that operate a level or two above us mere mortals, all those really great hitters, check their eyes. The George Brett, the Wade Boggs, the Henry Aarons, the Willie May. I'm sure they got rare eyesight. In other words, better than well above average eyesight. But Williams, tremendous guy. You know, he comes to Washington in '69, and you don't know what kind of guy. You know he's an icon, a baseball icon, but you don't know what kind of guy he's going to be to play for. And he comes to Washington. I'm in spring training 3 days. Freddie Baxter says, the boss wants to see you. I think, oh, what have I done now? And so I knock on his door. I said, Skip, you want to see me? Yeah, Bush, come on in here. Come on in, Bush. Call everybody Bush Leaguer. He said, hey, let me ask you a question, Bush. How can a guy hit 44 home runs and only get 48 base on balls? And I said, well, I try to be aggressive, Skip. Yeah. He said, I've seen you hit. You like that first little swifty you see, that fastball. I said, well, I better like that number 1, that fastball, because that 2, 3, and 4 they put down, curveball, slider, change, they're unidentifiable flying objects. He said, what do you mean? I said, They're UFOs. And he starts laughing. He starts laughing. He says, well, let me ask you another question, Bush. Do you ever take 2 strikes to get that real good pitch to move on? I said, Skipper, if I took 2 strikes to get a good pitch to move on, I'd be walking back to that dugout 190 times a year instead of 90. He starts laughing. He said, well, did you ever take, can you take a strike? If I'm talking about if it's a tough located pitch, fastball, or something other than what you're looking for, curveball, slider, change. I said, anybody can hit with a strike. Now, you'll hear hitting instructors say, we got to have a 2-strike approach to hitting. And you do have to have a 2-strike approach to hitting without giving up your swing. But in the 145 years of Major League Baseball hitters, you can take the great 2-strike hitters and put them on 4 hands. Probably 20 great 2-strike hitters. Williams would be one. Boggs would be one. Oh, God, I could name, I can't. Rusty Staub, I thought was Keith Hernandez. Great 2-strike hitters. But there aren't that many of them. The best pitch in baseball is strike 1. The second best pitch in baseball is strike 2. Most of us mere mortals do not operate very well in those 0-2 counts, ball 1 and 2 strike counts. We just, the pitcher's in, he's got you cornered now, But you let that count go 2-0, 3-1, 2 balls, no strike, 3 balls, 1 strike. Well, then we might be able to operate a little bit. But you count the great 2-strike hitter, Billy Madlock, another one. I could go on and name you 20 more, but that's about it.
All right.
But I'll tell you what he did for me. He took an undisciplined hitter, strike zone from the bill of your cap to your shoelaces, in or off the plate 2 or 3 inches off the plate. He took a 6'7" guy, condensed that strike zone, not like a Mays or like a Killebrew or one. I'm a bigger man. I'm going to have a bigger strike zone. But he did condense it a little. I found myself laying off a lot of bad breaking balls in the dirt and a lot of borderline high fastballs that you pop up or foul back or swing through. He tightened up my strike zone a little bit. I saw more 2-0, 3-1 counts than I ever saw in my life. And I went from about 48 base on balls to about 127 base on balls in 1 year. In 1 year, with one simple tip from this great hitting guru.
All right. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit. Now, you played with and for Gil Hodges. How weird is it to have a one-time teammate be your manager? And
I'm going to tell you what, there are a lot of great managers in baseball, a lot of great managers in baseball. But the 2 guys that I thought had total depth perception and peripheral vision of the whole baseball diamond were Dick Williams and Gil Hodges. And both of them very, very successful managers. Very, very. But no, I asked Pee Wee Reese about him one time, because Gil really helped me, and he woke me up too. He woke me up instead of just wandering through the game. He made me start thinking a little bit. Become a professional hitter because of him. You better have a better idea what that guy is trying to do to you out there. He won't wake up call. And he could wake you up with those steel blue eyes. But I tell you, I asked Pee Wee Reese about, I said, how about Gil, 6'2", 200, very ultra professional. Shoes shine, clean shaven, nice outfit on, slacks and a shirt on, very, very professional. I said, how great is he, Pee Wee? He said, Frank, I give Gil Hodges 2 weeks, and he could take any position on this ball club he wanted to take. I said, does that include you at shortstop? You're daggone right it does. So this guy was great hands, great. He and Dolph Camilli probably the 2 best right-handed throwing first basemen that ever lived. Great baseball mind. Great prep game. What?
And he's going into the Hall of Fame this year.
God bless him. God bless him. Many people say he should have been in there 20 years ago. But certainly deserving of it. Certainly deserving of it.
You pick up a newspaper today, and you will more often than not see an article about an insurrection a year ago. Yet 51 years ago, in 1971, the Senators had their own insurrection in the clubhouse led by Bernie Allen and Denny McLean. What was that like for you? How did you get to
What do you mean?
Well, they wanted to undermine Ted Williams in any way, shape, or form that they could.
Let me ask you something. I'm being totally, I have no idea that anything like that happened. You know, you got enough to show up on time because practice starts on time. Play as hard as you can, play as smart as you can that day. And then, you know, it's, I don't get involved in politics. You aren't going to win.
Mm. All right. Can you take us back to that final game at RFK that became the forfeit? The home run you hit during the game and the turmoil during the end, nearing the end.
Well, you know, in those days, Washington, D.C., I want you to think about something. Washington, D.C. was a small southern sleepy city of about 700,000 people. We drew some from the perimeter of Prince George's County, drew some from the perimeter of Virginia. So we really only had a population base of probably 1 million people. And as a result, and because we never had real strong clubs, we didn't draw that well. Bob Short moved that ball club to Dallas-Fort Worth. And Bob Addy, the great writer for the Washington Post, asked me, Frank, you think we'll ever get Major League Baseball back here? I said, within 5 years. And well, I was right, but it was something like, 32 years later? Baseball's perception of our area was of a small southern sleepy city of 700,000. They did not look forward and project the growth we've had here. Mm. Now you've got Washington, D.C., south of Fredericksburg, Virginia, you've got 1.5 million people. You take it west to Loudoun County and the other big county over there. What is it?
Fairfax?
Fairfax. Oh, you've got 3 million, close to 2.5 million people there. You go north to Montgomery County, Maryland, which is as closely aligned to us as it is to Baltimore. You got another million. You've got a population base of 5 million people to draw from. As a result, you know, you're going to have a successful franchise here. And you got disposable income. You got entertainment income. Highest per capita income of any county in any area in the country per capita. So you've got so many positive factors that it's going to be a successful operation.
Mm. Here's another name blast from the past. Arthur Lee May, the outfielder, I guess.
Sharky. Sharky and I played with. We played winter ball together in Puerto Rico. You know, can you imagine an outfield in Milwaukee in the late 50s, early 60s? You got Henry Aaron in right field. You got Bill Bruton, a great defensive center fielder in center field. You got Wes Covington or Arthur Lee May in left field. They had some Eddie Matthews at third base, Red Shaney's at second base, Big Joe Adcock for Dale Crandall catching. Well, you only had 16 clubs at the time, you know. Can you imagine the talent? Well, that's why they win it in 58, 57, 58.
Mhm.
You know, Arthur Lee May, great low fastball hitter, could run, could fly. Really, well, you know, a young player. I spent 3 years in winter ball, playing year round, and we're going to get back to another thing. Playing year round. Go to Class B 3I League, hit 38 home B-ball, hit 38 home runs, hit a couple in the big leagues when they call me up. You're going to go to the Dominican Republic. I said, I am? Yeah. You're going to play for Escogido. Your starting pitchers are going to be Freddie Kipp, Stan Williams, Juan Morichild, Big George Sackey could throw a baseball through a wall if he can hit the wall. You had Norm Sherry catching. I had to play first base. Kurt Roberts, big league player. Second base, Charlie Smith, big league player. Ozzie Virgil, the first Dominican to play in the big leagues at third base. Ozzie Virgil Sr. You got Matty and Lou in left, Carl Warwick in center, and Felipe Lou in right. But the more games you play, the better you're going to be.
Yeah.
You wonder why that sure double in the right field corner, sure double, possible triple. You wonder why Robert Clemente can take a drop step of about 15 to 18 inches, get himself in a running route where he cuts that ball off, makes a little U-turn, throws a one-hop bullet to second base, and that sure double, possible triple isn't there. You're out. He's done it in practice 1,000 times. He's done it under game conditions 300 times. We wonder why Orlando Cepeda can take that hard slider on the block, low and away, and whistle it off the right field wall or in the right center field seats. He's done it in practice 1,000 times and under game conditions 300 times. They refine their skills. They refine their skills through everyday play. We wonder why the Latino Poletero, the Latin player, excels. He excels because he plays baseball from the time he's 5 years old to 55, and he does it year round. I mean, they can do that. You know, one of the great things I've seen him, I want you to think about this. One of the great things I've seen heavyweight fights, NFL championship games, NBA games. I've seen, you know, a lot of different sporting things. Tony Pena caught 5 years in the minor leagues, caught 17 years in the big leagues, and caught 22 years for the Aguilas Eagles in the Dominican Republic in the wintertime. Can you imagine catching year-round 22 years?
Mm-hmm.
This guy doesn't need the first baseman to put the pickoff play on. He can look at the pitcher and out of the corner of his eye, see that runner getting too far. He'll receive a pitch without even looking, throw to first base, and you're out. You're out. Well, you know why? He's done it in practice 1,000 times, under game conditions 300 times. And they excel because they play. the more games you play, the better the better chance you have of reaching whatever potential you have.
Hmm.
Oh man, I developed a great friendship with, a ton of Latin American players on my team, on the opposing team over the years. I said, you know what it did for me? And here's a guy that's informally educated. It was like a college education. You learn to speak a different language, secondary language. You see a different diet, see a different culture, and you get paid for it. Now, not a lot of money in today's standards, but I'll tell you, in those days, it's pretty good money.
Mhm.
You know, it was like a college education. Go ahead.
Okay. How did you feel when the Washington Nationals captured the World Series in 2019, a couple years ago?
How did I feel? How did the entire country feel? The entire country was elated. The Boston Red Sox hadn't won a World Series in 75, 80 years. They've won 4 of them in the last 20 years. The Chicago Cubs hadn't won a World Series in 75 or 80 years. They won a World Championship.
Mm-hmm.
The Washington Nationals hadn't won a World Championship 75 or 80 years. Boom, they win a World Championship. It's one of the great things that can happen in baseball. It's just marvelous. The whole country was excited. Not only the great Washington, D.C. area, greater Washington, D.C. area, but the whole country was excited. Great for it. You know, it's that's what you play for. You play to go to the World Series. You play to go to the Super Bowl. You play to go to the NBA Finals. You play to go to win the Stanley Cup. You know, you'll gain more recognition as a member of a championship club than you probably will for all the individual stats you've ever created.
Frank, I'm going to ask you about, you know, often there aren't a whole lot of really good baseball players who then go into the coaching and managing ranks. You are an exception. I know if that was a plan that you had, that you wanted to become more or less a baseball lifer, but given that you did become a coach and a manager, were there coaches or managers whose style that you wanted to emulate, or by the same token, managers or coaches who you wanted to avoid being a copy of?
People ask me, what baseball do you know? I said, the only baseball I know is what I've learned from some far smarter baseball people than I'll ever be. But you're crazy if you don't talk to the Dick Williams, the Gil Hodges, the Tommy Lasordas, name the Tony La Russas. If you listen, you gotta ask questions. And if you listen, you can take a page or two out of each one of them's book, or maybe take the whole book and model yourself. Great. I mean, you know, I've learned so much baseball because I wanted to know. You know, they don't think we encourage our young players. I said, son, we're here to help you become the best player you can be. Don't be afraid to ask questions if there's something you don't know. I said, I'm in baseball 50 years and I'm still learning. No, we're not going to think you're stupid. We're going to think you're conscientious and you want to be better. And you're crazy. Cletus Boyer, God rest his soul. Pete and I coached with the Yankees for years. Cletus Boyer's probably forgotten more baseball than I'll ever know. The point being is, though, they know that game. They know that game. I see where my old coach and buddy and my former manager, Buck Shoulder, going to manage the New York Mets. Here's a guy I mean, you talk about all his I's are dotted and his T's are crossed, knows the game of baseball from A to Z and back from Z to A. You're crazy if you don't utilize that knowledge, you know? The only way we get better is if we compete with better players.
I'm
If,
gonna,
and if you don't take advantage of that great resource of baseball knowledge, I think you're foolish.
I'm going to ask you one last question before we let you go, Frank, and I'm going to say this in advance, a couple of things. One is that I haven't gotten to everybody's questions in the chat box, and I didn't even get to all of my own questions. And second, because I've got, 118 witnesses? 115 right now, says I want to make sure we get you back because people are just bombing this chat box saying, this is terrific, what a memory, what a treasure, what a resource. And they're talking about you, Frank, they're not talking about me. So,
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you a little piece of baseball advice.
okay,
Get a nice little fastball to hit off the wall or in the seats, because that curveball is an optical illusion, okay?
oh, that's
Take
better than any
care.
question I could pose. We
All
do
right,
have to move
champion,
on.
take care,
I'm
take
so
care.
sorry that time has gone so fast on this. But
Well, listen, I've enjoyed being with you, and if we can give our fans a few laughs and give our fans a few nice moments in baseball, maybe we've done our job. Thank
Well,
you.
there is only one Frank Howard, and he probably can't hear us applauding, but I'm going to over his phone. But this is terrific. Thanks so much. Wow. Yeah. Whew. Okay. Well, as we have come to know, any Shakespeare play with its iambic pentameter has 5 acts. And we have a sterling 5th act in David W. Smith. Dave joined SABR in 1977 and has had multiple papers in the Baseball Research Journal. He has made research presentations at 25 national SABR conventions and many more at regional meetings. In 2001 at SABR 31 in Milwaukee, he won the USA Today Sports Weekly Award, now known as the Doug Pappas Award, for his presentation on the 1951 NL pennant race. In 2016 at SABR 46 in Miami, he won the Doug Pappas Award for his presentation on the use of closers. In 2005, he received SABR's highest honor, the Bob Davids Award. And in 2012, he was honored with the Henry Chadwick Award. He's a past co-chair of the Statistical Analysis Committee and the recipient of the first SABR Special Achievement Award. He's also the founder and president of Retrosheet, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the collection, computerization, and free distribution of play-by-play accounts of Major League games. We've seen a few references to that in the chat box already today. He is an emeritus professor of biology after 40 years of service at the University of Delaware. There's only one Delaware. So I present to you now, for our enjoyment and edification, Mr. David W. Smith. Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Thanks, Mark. It's fun to be here.
It's fun to have you. I'm going to shut up.
What's nice, of course, is not to be outside today. It's just a little brisk. So I'm ready to jump right in here. Let's see if this will work. Oh, sharing my screen. Do you have to flip the switch so that my share screen will work? There it is. Okay, can you see my screen? And you can hear me?
We can see
Okay.
your screen. Yes, to both.
Okay, there we are. So, as the title says, ejections through the years and the impact of expanded replay. Why is this not working? Oh, there we are. Baseball ejections were not really followed very much before Doug Pappas, the one who's now the named award for each year's annual presentation. Doug did an incredible amount of work, mostly on his own, When he passed away, he had documented 11,200 ejections, and he lobbied hard to get ejections reported in baseball box scores every day. And then he was very successful at that. After Doug died at a very early age, David Vincent ended up taking over the job. Doug's ejection files came to Retrosheet, and David Vincent, who was the Retrosheet secretary, took that over and added to it, got up to about 15,000 ejections. Of course, David died some 6 years ago. And since then, I've taken it over. And along with the incredible help of Rob Wood, who is just an astonishing person, we're now up to 18,554 ejections as of added another one a couple of days ago. So we're always finding more. So going from 11,000 to 18,000 is pretty exciting. So I got two major topics I'm going to cover today. First, I'm going to make a bunch of historical lists. People like lists. There's a lot of things to see. Then I really want to talk about the effect of expanded replay because it's been dramatic. So let's start total ejections by year. So there is the total number by year, an incredible variation. Ejections only started in 1889. Before 1889, umpires did not have the authority to throw somebody out of the game. They could only issue a monetary fine. So starting in 1889, you could actually remove somebody. So from 1889 up through 2021, there's the pattern. It's all over the place, but you notice it was high early on, then went down, then it's back up. But of course, there's a different number of games played every year. And this the big peak up here in 1914 is the first year of the Federal League. And with the Federal League in play, we had 620 more games. So the next thing I did was to normalize that per game played. Makes it a little bit tidier. Finally, if you look at this one out here, this point in 2020, that's really low because I only played 898 games that year. So we normalize it per game. And notice that the y-axis is ejections per game. And you got these tiny numbers, 0.02, 0.04. To put that in perspective, 0.1, right here in the middle, would be one ejection every 10 games. And that's more or less the median through all of this. So just sort of turn that over, but this is a better way to present it. And you still find a huge variation. The first pattern I note, it started out very low and it went up and up and up and up into the teens. Then it went down through the lively ball era, went up in the 50s, and then came down again. This is all over the place. There's nowhere near a steady thing over the year, which I find it very interesting. But let's ask, who is it getting ejected? So I divided things by players, managers, and coaches. And you find the players are by far the ones getting ejected the most in the early years, up into the teens. They're way up at like 3 times more than managers. The blue line is the managers, and the green is the coaches. Remember, in the early part of the 20th century, there really weren't separate people called coaches. There weren't very many of them. So that's why those numbers are so small. There's also a lot of player managers. So you have to be very careful when you're documenting this. If a player manager was he ejected because of his role as a player or his role as a manager, which isn't always easy to determine. And notice as you go on, get to about 1940, the totals for the players and managers start to get close together. In the 50s, the players jump way up again, then they come back down, and you look way out on the right-hand side of this, in the last 20 years, players and managers are ejected at almost exactly the same rate. So we have almost no difference in the ejection rate between players and managers now, whereas 100 years ago, the players were ejected 3 times more than the managers were. It's a fascinating change. So let's look at who's ejected the most times. Look at all personnel in all roles together. So Bobby Cox is on top, 165. John McGraw, Leo DeRocher, names you would expect to see on the ejection list. And there's nobody there that's really a modern sort of person. Torrey is like the newest one. LaRusse is, but LaRusse's are mostly as a manager, as we're going to see. And here's the second 10. Now, Bruce Bochy, who's actually a pretty mild-mannered guy, but Bochy's up there with 77. Johnny Evers is up there at 72. On that, Gene Mock, 64. So there it is. Bobby Cox is the overwhelming leader, but that's and the people you would probably expect. And of course, most of the people on that list are managers, not entirely, but most of them are. So let's break it down by what their role was. How about the players of the most ejections? Johnny Evers leads by a lot with 58 ejections. Heine Zimmerman right behind him at 44. Then Jimmy Pearsall, who's quasi-modern, I would say. And all the way down there, Gary Sheffield is certainly modern. He kind of a hothead to get up that high on the list. And then Eddie Stanky, Lopez, DeRocher as a player, Johnny Temple, and then the bottom three are fairly modern guys, Tony Phillips, Reggie Jackson, and Bill Madlock. One of the things when you do a study like this, you always have to go back and do sanity checks. Say, wait a minute, does that make sense? Tony Phillips? I had no memory that Tony Phillips was that kind of an excitable guy, but it's correct. That's his real number. Reggie Jackson, I can see. Madlock, I can see, but I was surprised at Phillips. So there's a range, 58 down to 21. That's the top 20 guys. Now, let's look at the managers who were ejected the most often. Well, Cox's ejections were all as a manager. Cox played, but he was never ejected as a player. McGraw had a higher total, but that kind of is playing total. Here's his manager total. DeRocher, 99, Earl Weaver, 97, and so on down there. Modern guys on that list, Richards, Gardenhire, and Bochy. Torrey is on that list as a manager, 70 times. Bill Rigney, who managed both the Giants and the Angels when he gets up there. Sparky Anderson, Dick Williams, guys would expect. I was a little startled to see John Gibbons on this list. I don't think he got tossed that many times, but there he is. Now, Bill Clem, of course, iconic umpire for a long time. This shows some of the dilemmas you find. If you look at his Wikipedia page, they say he ejected 251 people. Close Call Sports says 256. His SABR biography says 279. When I first started this 3 years ago, we had 315. We now have 347 for him. So I am positive he had at least 347. I can document every one of those 347. I'm sure it's going to go up as we get older games. But the point of this is you got to be very careful when you see published stories on ejections. You've got to see where they got them, when they got them, because the data are changing all the time, especially for the older guys. Okay. We did players with the most ejections, managers with the most ejections. Here's umpires with the most ejections. First of all, Bill Clem has the most because he umpired the most games until Joe West passed him. Down left, Wrigley, O'Day, Jim Johnstone, there's Joe West. Now, next to each guy have his total ejections and the smaller number. For example, Clem, 347 total, 15.8. That's how many games for each ejection. So if Clem's ejecting somebody every 15.8 games, that's like twice a month he's getting an ejection. The names are, as you might expect, a lot of them are from the old days. Tommy Conley, Sybil Laughlin, Ernie Quigley. My favorite one on this list is Lord Byron. Now, William Lord Byron umpired in the National League for 7 years. And in those 7 years, he only umpired about 1,000 games, whereas Clem did 5,000. And he's on that list at 169. Byron was known as the singing umpire because he used to sing to players as he ejected them. And he'd look over at a guy and say, "So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know." And he's gone. And he really had it with John McGraw. A couple times McGraw would come in the field, "Here comes McGraw, here comes McGraw." Nobody in the stands loves all of this, of course. McGraw didn't love it so much. So there's the two who had the most frequent ejections, Jim Johnstone and Lord Byron. Johnstone tossed somebody every 8.5 games. Lord Byron got somebody every 6 games. That's, every 2 weeks he's getting a couple of that. Now at the other end, Bruce Fleming, who has a fair number of ejections because he also umpired a lot of games, was one every 42.6 games. That's an amazing range to me. 6 to 42.6, different views of the world. Okay. How about individual combinations of specific umpires and ejectees? There's all these legends like Earl Weaver and Ron Luciano are a legendary combination. There's a YouTube video of Earl Weaver with Bill Howler that is absolutely hilarious. It goes on and on and on. But let's look and see who actually did it the most. So here's the first 10. Johnny Evers was dumped 22 times by Cy Riegler. Remember, Evers had 72 ejections. Riegler is 22 of those 72. That's an extraordinary percentage for that. McGraw, Clem, McGraw, and so on. And here's the next 10, McGraw on down there. But that's a lot of numbers to look at. So what I did is highlight the individual people. Of the most frequent combination, John McGraw's on the list 5 times. So John McGraw leads it with 5 different umpires who ejected him at least 10 times. If you look at the next one, look at from the umpire's point of view, Clem is on the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 times because he umpired so very, very long. that we expected. Most ejections on a single day. This is always amazing. There it is, 18. In August of 1984, there was a day that had 18 ejections. Now, most of these are fairly new dates because, of course, we play more games. This is a total number of ejections on a day. Back in the 20s and 30s, of course, a normal baseball schedule would have 8 games a day. Now it has 14 games, 15 games a day. So there's going to be more chance for that. But here's the most amazing thing. That's the most on a single day. How about a single game? Atlanta in August of 1984, that is the game that had 18. That's the day that had 18. 17 of them were in one game. Now, there's a YouTube video that shows the whole thing. And I have an appendix to the paper I wrote for this that talks about the whole thing. The beanball fight between the Padres and the Braves. The first pitch of the game by Pascual Perez hit Alan Wiggins in the back, first pitch of the game. The next 3 times that Perez came to bat, Padre pitchers tried to hit him and missed. And there were several ejections along the way. And finally, his 4th time up, Ed Whitson did hit him. And then everything goes crazy. Everybody comes on the field. Bob Horner, who was on the disabled list, watching the press box, comes down to the field, puts on his uniform, comes out in the field to get into the fight. It's just an amazing disaster. So there's the top. Every game with 8 or more. Back to the previous one about most on a single day, there have been 350 days that had at least 5 ejections. How about single season records? Okay, McGraw is up there with at 11. Bobby Cox is 11. This is everybody with 10 or 11. Let's highlight that. McGraw's on the list 4 times, 2 11s and 2 10s. The top 2 are consecutive years, you notice, 1905, 1906. And then Bobby Cox is on the list 3 times, not consecutive years, but he spread it out a little bit. And Paul Richards, who I thought that was interesting. He was a manager for quite a while, but there he is. He's on the list twice. But the other point of view, what umpire had the most ejections for a season? Mal Eason tossed 33 people in 1914. Cy Wrigley right behind him, Lord Byron right behind him. Here goes the numbers down there. And here's the top 18 or 19 or something like that. Let's highlight some leaders. Bill Clem is 4 of those. Now, this has nothing to do with longevity because this is single seasons. Clem is on that list 5 times, ejecting at least 23 people in a year. But here's my favorite. There's Lord Byron. He is 5 of them. Remember, Byron umpired 7 years in the National League. These are his first 5 years as a major league umpire that he gets this many, tied for second place with 31 of them. How about reasons? Why do people get ejected? Well, if you look at the most common one is balls and strikes. When I say all types, that means people yelling from the dugout as well as batters complaining or catchers complaining. That's everything that's balls and strikes. And so I say general under that, the 4868. The general means I can't specify what the exact reason was, but I do tell the 2 that I can. A called third strike and a check swing. So called third strike is 2,500, check swing is 550, but that's an awful lot of almost 8,000 from balls and strikes. Balls on the bases is next at 4,400. Bench jockeying, which is a great term, just basically means you're grumbling about something from the dugout. Often those bench jockeying complaints are related to balls and strikes. And when we know there were balls and strikes, I put them in that category. When we don't know, I just have to call it something general. Fighting is over 1,000 times, and intentionally throwing at the batter is 757 times. You get a lot of pitchers tossed for that. There are other reasons, arguing balks, arguing fair and foul. There's several hundred of those. You have a surprising number of those coming up. Now, let's look at the difference between being ejected for a ball and strike call or ejected for a call on the bases. So here it is from 1901, because the numbers before that are so thin, I left them out. The red dots are people getting ejected for complaints on balls and strike. That could be the pitcher, it could be the batter, it could be the catcher, it could be a manager, anybody being ejected because of balls and strikes. And notice that the red dots are pretty much mixed in with the blue dots up to about 1960, and except for the 1950s, there's many more balls and strikes. And then calls on the bases are in the blue are much, much lower until there, circle the last 8 years, they've almost disappeared. So people are not getting ejected for calls on the bases anymore. And why is that? It's because you cannot request a replay request for a ball and strike call. You can only request replays on things like calls on the bases or fair foul, things like that. And what has happened is that people don't argue very much about calls on the bases anymore. Because one thing, that if it has been appealed, the stadium jumbotron is going to show the play over and over and over. Everybody can see what it is. There's very little to even complain about. So, for example, it was 2019, there was one ejection for a call on the bases on 150 for balls and strikes. So the ejections don't happen because of calls on the bases anymore. People just don't complain about it very much. There's always a few. I think the maximum that last 8 years is a total of 7. On the other hand, ejections for balls and strikes are going up. You notice the last few years, they're higher and higher. That not only are the ejections for calls on the bases going down, but ejections for balls and strikes are going up. So I expanded here. This is 1970. This is the last 50 years, 1970 to 2021, to show even more how the separation has happened. Because as I showed before that, they weren't so very separate. Now they're getting more and more and more separate. And it's both ways. The ejections for calls on the bases go down. The ejections for balls and strikes are going up. Now, another way to look at this is to look at each of these types of ejection, balls and strikes versus calls on the bases, as a percentage of total ejections. All I was doing before was comparing those two to each other. Now let's compare it to the overall pattern. And you see it's even more that the ball calls, ejections because of balls and strikes are going up at the same time that ejections for calls on the bases are going down. So I'm left with two parts of this graph that I have trouble with. 1950s, the increase from the balls and strike ejection is, I don't understand what it is, and then it went away. And then the early 1980s, something really changed. Even before replay started, which is 2008, even before replay started, ejections for calls on the bases were going down, while ejections for balls and strikes were going up. I really don't have a good explanation for those. Remember when I showed the total ejections before, I said there was a big increase in the 1950s. It turns out the reason for that increase in the 1950s was ejections of players and ejections for balls and strikes. Now, why were players so mad about balls and strikes in the 1950s, but then they stopped being mad in the 60s? I have no idea why that is. I'm open to suggestions, but those two patterns, what happened in the 50s and the early 80s, are the ones that are the hardest for me to figure out. So here's my conclusions. The dead ball era had the highest rates, then there was a large decrease up through the 1940s. Dramatic rise in the 50s, then it drops to near record lows by 1970. Prior to the 50s, balls and strikes and calls on the bases led to ejections with similar frequencies. Like in the 1950s, due to increased ejections over calls on balls and strikes, like I said. And since 1970, they have been much more likely causes than calls on the bases, which were stable until 2014. Currently, over 70% of ejections occur following disputes on balls and strikes. The historical average was around 40%. And as expected, expanded replays have almost completely eliminated ejections following decisions on the bases. I figured I have to end with a good picture. What was that? Oh, and by the way, the full ejection database, everything we have, is on our website. So you're welcome to go there and download it and do anything you want with it. Love to have each on. And there's my picture to contribute for the day. I don't have a picture of Weaver and Luciano, but there's a Weaver and Ken Kaiser. I just love that picture. Kaiser looks like he's about to devour him. Any of you who were at the Kansas City SABR meeting in 1996, remember that Kaiser came and spoke to the group. He's just was a beast of he's a professional wrestler as well. That is just such a fantastic picture of Earl and Kaiser. So that's all I got.
Oh, but wait, there's more. We got some questions for you, Dave, from the chat box.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Here we go. Let's see. Does it make a difference when it comes to umpire ejections, depending on the size of the umpire crew? Because you had only a couple of umpires at best, a century ago, and now you have 4-man crews.
That's a wonderful question. The answer is yes. Whoever said that is correct. That 3-man crews started being used routinely in 1930 or so. Before that, there were almost always 2-man crews. And when there's a 2-man crew, you would expect that there were going to be more disputes on the bases because the one umpire on the bases has an awful lot of ground to cover. So that does make sense. When you get to the 30s, you have a 3-man crew, and you start getting the 4-man crew routinely in the early 1950s. So that doesn't explain all of this, but certainly the big increase or higher number for calls on the bases 100 years ago, I think the fact it's a 2-man crew has a lot to do with that.
And the Clem types, there's only 2 of them. You have more umpires to tick off. They can take their...
Good point.
Let's see. How do you treat the Dodgers game in which the entire bench was ejected, including Bill Sharman, who never played in a big league game?
That's a lovely story. It turns out it's not true. He wasn't ejected. When benches are cleared, those players are not ejected. They're removed from the bench, sent to the clubhouse, but are allowed to return to get in the game. And we have several cases that's true. And so sometimes you'll have 2 players ejected and then the bench is cleared. That San Diego game with the 17 ejections, there were not only 17 ejections, but they also cleared the benches, but some of those guys came back in the game later. So Bill Sharman was not ejected because he was one of the ones in the bench clearing, but he would have been allowed to return, but he didn't.
Somebody asks, most ejections by an owner, but maybe of an owner.
We have 44 ejections of non-players, non-managers, and coaches, camera operators, mascots, fans, Ted Turner. Yeah, there's a few of those, not too many.
Okay. Question, top 3 ejections by umpire by year, all in 1914.
Yeah.
Thoughts on why?
Well, I saw that too. 14 is the first year of the Federal League, but the Federal League wasn't any higher than the National American League. They're all about the same. One of the differences, and this is the best I can come up with, the 2 leading player ejections were Evers and Zimmerman. They were both active then. They were both playing, and maybe that's where it comes from. I don't know, but it's hard to imagine 2 guys skewing the whole thing. But absolutely, that year really stands out.
Mm-hmm. Somebody says your manager might be getting ejected more often on ball strike calls because they want to get ejected to fire up their teams, and other calls are handled by replay.
Well, that might be it too. And what I'm really intrigued by is the fact that the players and managers are now being ejected at the same frequency. I interpret that a couple of ways. One is the managers are coming out to try to protect their players and keep them in the game. And the other is that the players want to stay in the game. They're going to contribute to the team only if they're in the game. They've got all these financial incentives to do it. So I think players are a little less likely to argue than they used to be, and managers are more likely to argue than they used to be.
So you think the fact that more games started being televised, in the 50s and 60s has some kind of effect?
I don't know. The thing you get now, of course, the strike zone, the box is drawn on the screen with every batter. That's a much more recent thing than the 1950s. I don't know how much that has to do with it. The TV quality in the 50s and 60s, before there was much replay, I don't know if there would have been very much of an effect on that. I think that would be much later, 70s and 80s.
See, another enjoyable Dave Smith presentation. No, that's not a question. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have an email? I would like to discuss research methodology, please.
Well, you can always go on our website, but it's real easy. dwsmith@retrosheet.org.
You hear that, folks? I'll repeat it one more time. D as in David, W as in W, Smith at retrosheet.org. And I got 21 new messages since I started at the top. Holy cats, we didn't have 21 messages to start by the time you ended. The grounds crew ejected in Baltimore?
Say again?
Wasn't the grounds crew ejected in Baltimore?
Probably. Yeah, there was. Yes, I think it was. Was.
Mascots? Who? Why?
Well, Youppi got ejected in Montreal because Youppi was mouthing off to Bob Davidson, who had a real short fuse. And Davidson, you got to get out of here. So the Fanatic has never been ejected, but Youppi was.
Somebody says the bait crew was removed from waiting behind the tarp, only sent back to regular spot behind fence. Oh.
I don't get that one.
I don't know who the bait crew is. Marlins? I don't know. Anyway, do you have postseason ejection stats?
Yeah, they're in there.
Okay.
And there's been a total of 60 postseason ejections out of the nearly 19,000 60-hour postseason.
It's not the bait crew, it's the Balt crew. I guess I gotta get a new pair of glasses, Mr. Magoo. Where is
They're
the
not
paper
getting
available?
younger. So.
Here's the question though. Yes, I mean, I would have asked this myself. So you've got this like on a PowerPoint and dwsmith@retrosheet.org, and you'll send a copy of your PowerPoint?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
And
And
that's
that-
it.
and what the motto of Retrosheet is we give everything away for free. So yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, all right. It's 1 o'clock. Any last questions for Dave Smith? Going once. Going twice. Oh, thank you so much, Dave. Man, terrific, terrific. My gosh, your presentations have always been a highlight of Bob David's chapter meetings, and this was no exception.
That's very sweet of you.
Well, it's the truth, you know. Now, while technically we have no more in-person guests, we do have a couple of visitors that I would like to present to you from the past, if you want to stick around. Their names are Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. I've got the key player of Yogi Berra's favorite baseball radio shows. A 10 CD set queued up to Who's On First, as presented April 17th, 1947 on The Camel Show, sponsored by Camel Cigarettes. Who's On First was so popular in Abbott and Costello's heyday, they did this routine on the radio once a month. I still laugh out loud when I hear this, like I did when I played this bit last night. I hope you get a kick out of it too. Thanks for being here. And until next time, get out your scorecards, gang, because you're gonna need them.
Mark, it's not coming through.
Mark, we're not able to hear it if you're playing it.
Yeah, are you sharing your screen?
I think he was just playing it off of Boombox, but it's not coming through. So so go to your local internet archive and go hear Abbott and Costello there. I'll just wrap up. It was great having everyone here. We thank all of our guests. We thank all of our presenters, and thank you for making this meeting wonderful. Catch you next year. And don't forget Talking Baseball in 2 weeks from now on the 12th. So long, everyone.
Good day.